politics to the world of business. This is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
Benjamin Netanyahu says there is a date for the invasion of Rafah. Welcome to the fastest show in politics. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lines in Washington with a lot to talk about, Kaylee, including geopolitics and now finally a date for this invasion that the White House has been hoping will never happen.
Yeah, granted, we don't actually know what that date is, just that there is one, according to the Israeli prime minister. But, Joe, this does follow moves we saw from Israel over the weekend, pulling troops out of Khan Yunis, which the defense minister said essentially that withdrawal was partly to prepare for this operation in Rafah that could be forthcoming.
That's right, a regrouping, if you will. We're going to talk this hour with Carmel Arbit at the Atlantic Council about all of this, Kaylee, as Joe Biden today makes his way to Wisconsin. He's talking about student loan forgiveness.
Yeah, it's interesting. He wants to forgive loans for another 26 million Americans. We'll see if this program has any more success legally than his first attempt at doing so does. But it's interesting to think about what that might mean for young voters in particular. And we know that young voters are one of those demographics that do have a big problem with his handling of Israel. And maybe this is a way to draw them back into the fold.
For sure. If you look at the polling, this is one of his biggest challenges as he faces Donald Trump once again.
Absolutely. So we have a lot to discuss this hour here on Bloomberg Television and Radio. But first, though, as always, we get a check on the markets with Charlie Pellet up in New York. Hey, Charlie.
Thank you very much, Kaylee Lines. We're looking at an update right now. Stocks have been fluctuating, but right now, green on the screen. We've got the S&P up 7, a gain of just about 0.1%. Little change for the U.S. stock market overall, though. The Dow is higher, up by about 0.1%, up 39 points right now. The NASDAQ Composite Index up 28 for NASDAQ, a gain there of 0.2%. 10-year, 4.42% right now with a 2-year that's yielding 4.78%. Spot gold, lower a little change, down $1 the ounce right now, $22.38 for an ounce of the precious metal, while West Texas Intermediate crude oil is down 1.1%, $85.99 for a barrel of WTI. We've got Amazon shares higher by 0.3%. Amazon is moving higher, eclipsing a previous record, while fellow mega cap tech shares, including Meta Platforms, Microsoft, and NVIDIA, have all reached records in recent months. Amazon has lagged the pack, but Amazon right now up by about 0.3%. Again, recapping here, stocks are trading higher. S&P up 6, a gain there of 0.1%. Balance of power continues. Back we go to Washington. Once again, Kaylee Lines and Joe Matthew.
All right, Charlie Pellet up in New York, thank you so much. I'm Kaylee Lines alongside Joe Matthew here in Washington, where we are not, sadly, in the path of totality today for the eclipse. Is Wisconsin in the path of totality? Because that's where President Biden is going to spend his afternoon.
Good point. I guess he'd have something to look at there, if not total. The zone of totality, I feel like there needs to be an album recorded. I think you'd make a lot of money right now. I've heard so much about this. We spoke with our own Julie Fine in the zone of totality to the south, where, Kaylee, it's cloudy today.
That's a big bummer.
Yeah.
So I guess we'll get to see if President Biden experiences the eclipse, or to a degree, in Wisconsin. But of course, he's there with a very specific message today, Joe, and that is that he would like to provide more student loan relief to the Americans who are saddled with that debt.
And here you thought this was not happening. Remembering the Supreme Court shot down the first attempt to do this. Now, Kaylee, it's a plan B. We're talking about as many as 26 million Americans. The question is, will it work? That remains a question, and it could for the balance of this campaign. And that's where we start today with Jordan Fabian, Bloomberg White House reporter, is with us now for more on this. Jordan, it's good to see you. What makes this different than the first one? Is it the more strict criteria? How's the White House going about this?
It's still quite broad-based, Joe, but the White House has tried to make it more targeted in order to pass legal muster. So they've targeted groups like borrowers whose balances exceed their original principals, borrowers who might qualify for other federal programs but haven't yet enrolled. And so the hope is that by tailoring it a little more narrowly, they will be able to pass muster. But we'll have to see if the courts agree with that approach.
Yeah, and of course, we'll hear from the president about this afternoon. He's going to be speaking in Madison, Wisconsin, where, of course, the University of Wisconsin is. And that was also one of the areas in the Wisconsin primary that we just saw earlier this month, in which he struggled with the uninstructed vote. A lot of young voters, as we have seen in college towns all across the Democratic primary states, are voicing protest over his policy surrounding Israel and the ongoing war in Gaza. Is this give them something so you can try to get them back, knowing they're upset with you over Israel? Try to make some progress on the student loan front?
Yeah, as you mentioned, Kaylee, these college towns are sort of ground zero for all of President Biden's problems. You mentioned the Israel-Gaza war. This student loan issue is a big issue for young voters, Gen Z voters, who he needs to show up in November. I think we had polling showing them falling away from President Biden after they strongly supported him in 2020. He's going to need voters in these college towns like Madison, State College in Pennsylvania, to name a couple, to come out for him in November. And so he's starting today. The risk is that he'll go to Madison, and I'm sure there'll be protesters there. But the White House is hoping that their message isn't drowned out and that this appeal breaks through to those voters.
Some impressive fundraising numbers. I'm sure you saw, Jordan, for March. $90 million for the Biden campaign and for the DNC. He ends the month with $192 million cash on hand, which is more than double what Donald Trump and the Republican Party, the RNC, have in their equivalent accounts here. It's interesting to me, the money game that we're talking about. Donald Trump's getting a lot of attention for setting a record over the weekend with a $50 million haul in one night, doubling what Joe Biden managed when he was on stage with Bill Clinton and Barack Obama. How would you frame the money contest right now, if that's in fact what we should be paying attention to?
The $50 million haul is impressive, but it also illustrates how much ground President Trump has to make up against President Biden. Biden's war chest that is more than double of what Trump's is. And so why does this matter? Look ahead to later this summer, going into the fall, when the election really starts to become the focus for people. Biden's going to have a lot more money at this point to open those offices in battleground states, to get people out, knocking on doors, handing out materials, and also to flood the airwaves with advertisements. One of Biden's biggest problems is that he's done all these things in his first term, whether it's the Inflation Reduction Act, whether it's this action on student loans today, and he's not getting a lot of credit for it among voters. So the advertising could help that break through to people who haven't really been tuning in. So those are the ways that you can look for Biden to kind of outpace Trump. But money isn't everything. Trump was outraised by Hillary Clinton in 2016, and he went on to win. So while it's important, it is not the decisive factor.
All right, Jordan Fabian, who covers the White House for us here at Bloomberg, thank you so much for joining us. And of course, as Jordan there was talking about some of these college towns and the issues resonating there, including policy over Israel, we know, Joe, that the White House has been pushing more aggressively, so perhaps, Israel to do more in terms of humanitarian aid, protection of civilians. And that really has been the heart of the debate over an operation in Rafah, that city where over 1 million Palestinians have sought refuge. We just get a statement from Netanyahu about Rafah. Again, he says there is a date for that. We just don't know what the date is. Yeah, it's really something, as you mentioned, they were pulling out of certain areas to regroup, and that did give us a sense that something might be about to happen here. The administration has been adamant about this. No invasion at all, without a credible plan to evacuate civilians. I'm not sure that we see any reference to that here. It will happen, says Netanyahu. There is a date. We did hear from the White House over the weekend on this as well, when it comes to our deteriorating relationship. Yeah, this was something that Admiral John Kirby, who of course is a spokesman for the NSC, was asked about on ABC's This Week, and this is what he said.
We have been increasingly frustrated, and again, that was a core message that the president delivered to Prime Minister Netanyahu in their phone call this past week, that if they've got to do more, they've got to make changes. Now, the Prime Minister assured the president that he would do that. We've seen some announcements in those early hours. That's welcome. We got to see more. We've got to see it over time.
So for more, we're joined now by Carmel Arbit. She is Atlantic Council non-resident senior fellow for Middle East programs. Carmel, always great to have you with us here on Bloomberg Television and Radio. As we hear from Admiral Kirby there, the idea that they've got to see more, they think they will see it over time. How much are we seeing already? Not just in terms of the fact that there has now been another corridor open for humanitarian aid in Erez, for example. They have the military has taken action with those who were responsible for the World Central Kitchen strike that resulted in deaths of 7 of those humanitarian aid workers. Are we seeing Israel actually come around to the U.S.'s way of thinking here, or are these relatively small steps that don't actually fundamentally change too much in terms of their policy?
Yeah, thanks so much. I think we are at a fundamental change point in this war. It's not just that Israel has pulled out of Khan Yunis, it's that they have pulled the majority of their troops out of Gaza as they prepare to move to the next phase of war, which will likely be more pinpointed attacks. So I think we are seeing a really significant shift here. Now, how that plays out is yet to be seen. I think on the one hand, you have Netanyahu speaking to domestic audiences, asserting over and over again that there will be an operation in Rafah, which many in Israel are now starting to doubt, while at the same time pulling out troops to prepare for what could be a breakthrough in ceasefire talks as part of Hamas's demands. So we're really at an inflection point in this war right now where we're seeing a shift in Israel's operation.
Well, should we doubt whether this invasion takes place now that we have this statement? Carmel, how do you read what Netanyahu is saying, only suggesting that there is a date?
I think the question is what that operation is going to look like. So 20 out of the 24 battalions of Hamas's military have been dismantled, and the 4 that remain are in Rafah. So the question for Israel is what they're going to do, how and when they are going to go into Rafah. Right now, as I had mentioned, the ceasefire talks are really very close, and there is a huge amount of international pressure, including from the White House, which is exerting pressure now in a way that it had not been throughout this war. We've seen a huge shift in U.S. public opinion and thinking about this war and in how the administration is approaching it. And with that, now we're starting to see a shift within the Israeli government as well.
Yeah, in part of the statement we got from Netanyahu, not just the suggestion that there is a date for an entry into Rafah, he also said he has gotten a report on those talks in Cairo. He says we are working all the time for the achievement of our goals. First of all, the return of all of our hostages. And Carmel, as you talk about the international pressure on Netanyahu and the Israeli government right now, it's also worth noting there is domestic pressure as well. Once again, over the weekend, we saw thousands protesting, calling for a deal that would secure the release of those hostages. How should what's happening inside Israel factor into our thinking about Netanyahu's likely moves as we move forward?
It's very important. Ultimately, all politics are local. And so you see Netanyahu continually speaking to both sides, both to his far-right government, who he's trying to show muscle to and that he will not cower to international pressure, and at the same time is responsive to the thousands of Israelis who are taking to the streets to demand the release of more than 130 hostages. Every day that passes, the number of hostages that are killed grows. It is now believed that about half of those hostages are still alive. And so every day the pressure mounts.
I'm glad you mentioned that because there was a terrifying story in the Washington Post this morning about families, parents of 2 boys in this case who they thought, 2 sons, were being held hostage, hoping for their release for the last 6 months, only to learn that they had died either during their captivity or as they were dragged into Gaza. Carmel, to what extent are families in Israel losing hope?
Yeah, there is a huge amount of pain in Israel right now, not just over the hostage situation, but that Netanyahu has yet to deliver on many of the fundamental promises he made about this war. That includes dismantling Hamas, and while he's made significant military gains, Hamas still remains in power in Gaza. The hostages have not been released. There is a huge amount of pain and suffering. More than 250 Israeli soldiers have been killed in this war in Gaza. And many Israelis feel that they are they're not winning. And so Netanyahu is under pressure to prove that that's not the case, while at the same time to try to retain his position of power, which is becoming increasingly challenged.
Well, as there is still, as you have rightly alluded to, a ongoing threat from Hamas. There are still battalions that have not been dismantled. There also, Carmel, though, might be more of a threat from Iran directly, not just from an Iranian proxy like Hamas. We have heard in recent days that Israel's military is prepared to respond to a scenario that could develop if Iran retaliates for the strike on the embassy in Damascus earlier this month. What could we see from Iran? Do you think we could actually see some form of retaliation from Iran directly rather than this being done through proxies as we have seen in the past?
Yeah, I think the stakes around Iranian retaliation right now are incredibly high for two reasons. One, the timing is going to matter a lot because the Israelis and Hamas are so close to a ceasefire agreement. Anything that Iran does right now could potentially derail that. So that's the first thing to keep an eye on. The second thing that we're looking at is whether or not Iran is going to escalate. There have been dozens upon dozens of attacks emanating from Hezbollah, also on U.S. assets across the region, and similarly, Israeli attacks on Iranian assets, including those that have increasingly targeted the IRGC and the Iranians directly. And we've seen that throughout the war. But up until this point, it's really been at a relatively low simmer. It's been kind of this medium heat, if you will. So the question now for Iran is whether or not they're going to increase that temperature. Most likely what we're going to see is some kind of attack on Israeli or American assets overseas. I think the scenario in which they would attack on Israeli soil remains pretty low, but would mark a significant escalation in this conflict.
So where does this actually play out then? Is it in Syria itself? Are we at sea, Carmel, or does that have yet to present itself?
It really has yet to present itself, and the Iranians have many options, and that includes everything from embassies or Israel's diplomatic presence overseas in countries as far-reaching as, Latin America or Europe, where the Israelis have already put their staff on alert. We could also be looking at U.S. assets in the seas. The U.S. has, of course, been working to tamp down on Houthi attacks and has done so relatively successfully in recent months. So we could see really in any of these arenas, Iran really playing up its role and going after, again, either the U.S. or the Israelis directly.
Carmel, it's great to see you. Thanks for coming back to see us from the Atlantic Council. Carmel Arbit, on a day that we have learned, according to the Associated Press and now confirmed in a statement by Benjamin Netanyahu, Kayleigh, that a date has been set for the invasion of Rafah. There's no sense, obviously, based on this conversation, when that will be or in what form that it will take.
No, all he says is that it will happen and that victory for Israel requires an entry into Rafah and the elimination of the remaining Hamas battalions there. So it becomes a question, Joe, of between now and whatever date ultimately is set for this operation, what can be done for the million plus civilians in Rafah? Can they be successfully moved, given aid, protected, as the U.S. would like to see?
That's true. This is all going to play into the conversation surrounding aid, potentially, for Israel and Ukraine. They might be tied together, and we'll talk next about that. Lawmakers are back in town this week after a 2-week recess, and our panel is with us next. This is Balance of Power, only on Bloomberg.
Okay, today I'm going to talk about how to succeed with a startup. Obviously, more than can be said here in 20 minutes, but I will do the best I can. The most important thing, the number one lesson we try to teach startups is that the degree to which you're successful approximates the degree to which you build a product that is so good, people spontaneously tell their friends about it. Startups always ask us for the secret to success. They always want to believe it's something other than this, because this is really hard to do. But this is it. If you can build a product that is so good, people spontaneously tell their friends about it, you have done 80% of the work that you need to be a really successful startup. If you think about the most successful companies you know, Google, Facebook, whatever, you probably found out about them because a friend of yours said, you got to try this, it's great. So this is the bar. Something that people love so much they tell their friends about it. One important indicator for a product like that is a product that's simple to explain and easy to understand. If you can't explain in a few words what you do, and if at least some people don't say, oh, that's pretty interesting, that's usually a mistake. It's usually a sign of unclear thinking or a need that is not big enough.
I want a bank that shows me what I spend instantly.
We're Monzo. Give us a go. See?
I want a bank that can help me budget for the things I need. Like a new leather jacket for Bingo.
We can do that.
Bingo's my cockapoo.
Hi, Bingo.
It's a real faff to sign up.
It takes less than 10 minutes.
Race you.
You're on. Time's up. How'd you get on?
It's a draw.
Is it? We hear you, Bingo. You make Monzo Monzo.
It's 121 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long at Bloomberg. We have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all higher, all little changed right now, up by less than 0.1% on all three. 3-point gain right now in the S&P at 52.07. Dow Industrials up 18 points. On NASDAQ is higher by 8. Little changed, up less than 0.1%. 10-year 4.42%. Bond yields hitting 2024 highs. We've got the 2-year 4.78%. Spot gold up 74 cents the ounce to 23.30. Little change there. While West Texas Intermediate crude down $1 now, down 1.1%. WTI 85.95 a barrel. Trump Media and Technology Group shares wiping out some $2.8 billion in value as the meme stock struggles to captivate the retail traders who help power initial gains. Right now, we've got shares of Trump Media lower by 10%. The company, by the way, uses the ticker DJT. Again, recapping, little change for the U.S. equity market. S&P up 3, up by about 0.1%. Balance of power continues. Back we go to Washington. Once again, here they are, Kaylee Lyons and Joe Matthew.
All right, Charlie Pellet helping us kick off the trading week. Thank you so much. I'm Kaylee Lyons alongside Joe Matthew here in Washington, D.C., broadcasting live on Bloomberg Television and radio as we begin this work week. And actually, for the first time in several weeks, Congress is getting ready for a work week as well. They're coming back. The Senate will be here tonight. Yes. The House gets back in tomorrow because why begin the work week on Monday when you could start it on Tuesday?
It's kind of a week.
Yeah, partial.
They'll be back to the 3.5-day thing.
Yeah.
With actually a lot to do, not a lot likely to get done, however. We've got this great piece Stephen Dennis put together on the terminal. I highly suggest you read it. Trains, planes, and TikTok. Long agenda for Congress, low on time. I'd say low on expectations as well, Kaylee. Once we get through FISA, this warrantless spying matter, maybe Ukraine funding, anything else at that point would be gravy.
Yeah, considering the longer we go on, the closer we get to the election, when a lot of these lawmakers are going to be focused much more on campaigning and trying actively not to do anything that could disrupt the campaign from a legislative standpoint.
All that assuming we have the same speaker, and that's something that we're going to learn about potentially soon. Our panel is with us to help us make sense of it all. Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis make our signature panel, Bloomberg Politics contributors, and here they are. For our TV and radio audiences worldwide, it's great to see both of you. Rick, we were told by Marjorie Taylor Greene that if a Ukraine funding bill hit the floor when they came back from the Easter recess, and here we are, that she was going to trigger a motion to vacate against Mike Johnson. So he's coming in here on thin ice as lawmakers return to town. Will anything happen in the next couple of weeks on this matter? Do you hear that there's momentum among House Republicans?
Well, there are plenty of House Republicans that want to see Ukraine funding, and there are actually plenty of Democrats who want to see Ukraine funding. Abigail Spanberg, a great example. You put Ukraine funding on the agenda, and I'll back you for speaker. So the quid pro quos have already started. And I think if you're Johnson, you're not worried about being speaker. You're worried about the process with which you're going to go through to put this Ukraine funding bill on. In other words, what's it look like? Is it going to be a loan program? Is it going to be, a series of things? Are there going to be conditions on the Israeli aid? I mean, he's got a lot within that bill that he has to justify. But at the end of the day, he knows he has the votes for it, and he knows he's got the backing of Democrats if he gets a vote on that bill to back him for speaker. So at the end of the day, all this could happen in the next week or so, and we'd be right back where we started, at least with the passage of a Ukraine bill.
Well, but Rick rightly points out, Jeannie, that this all could be tied to Israeli aid as well. And if you're going to count on Democratic votes to get this over the finish line, how many Democrats could be lost if support for Israel is also included in this package?
Yeah, I think that's a real concern, especially in the Senate. I was listening over the weekend to Bernie Sanders, and of course, there is somebody who obviously, like all the Democrats in the Senate, has endorsed the president. But he was saying, he has some real concerns about how the White House has handled the issue with Israel. We've heard it from Chris Coons, the president's close advisor. We've heard it from Senator Van Hollen. So there is a chance that coupling those two things could result in an inability to pass either one. And of course, they are both critical. And, it just speaks to what a position, as you look at the House Mike Johnson is in. It's almost no matter which way he turns, his job is threatened, and how much all of us, unfortunately, are going to have to hang on the words of Marjorie Taylor Greene for the next couple weeks, if not more, as she sort of decides if she's going to move forward with this or not.
I'd like to ask you both about things that we think are real. We can talk about the wacky politics when we have time, but I have to mention this tax deal that so many people thought was going to become law a few months ago. Now it looks like it might die on the vine. A week from today, my calculations are correct, is tax day. And this had to be done by then. We're told if this $78 billion bipartisan agreement does not pass the Congress before tax day, then we can forget about it. What happened to this, Rick? It's Senate Republicans who are poking holes in something that passed the House with broad bipartisan support.
Yeah, the brakes went on as soon as this bill hit the Senate, and I was surprised actually that it didn't get combined up with a few other priorities. As you point out, there are a lot of things sitting on the docket in the Senate and the House right now, a dozen bills that are actually pretty important measures. There are only a few that would fall to the bottom, like marijuana banking legalizations, which we talk about every 6 months. But FISA reauthorization, this tax bill. I mean, this tax bill, I think, ran aground on technical issues with the tax code, but also Republicans who didn't want to see Joe Biden signing a tax cut. And I think that there was a lot of politics to play in this regard.
Well, you mentioned FISA as well, Rick, which is probably the most immediate deadline. Tax day, of course, is April 15th. So I guess you consider that a deadline. Then April 19th is when the expiration is. It also is when Mike Gallagher will walk the halls of Congress as a member for the last time. He'll be gone after that, and then the margin shrinks even further. So on this FISA agreement, knowing that Mike Johnson, the speaker, has changed his tune multiple times, has pulled this twice already, is the third time going to be the charm, Rick? Do you have an understanding of which way the speaker is really leaning on this? Who's he going to disappoint?
Yeah, there's a lot of pressure building up. All the three-letter agencies briefed the full Congress right before they left for their Easter work period. And they laid down a pretty hard set of conditions under which they need this FISA bill reauthorized. And when you have that many intelligence agencies sitting with a full congressional briefing, it really raises the ante. So I think that unlocked the ability to get this done. And of course, conditions around the world have not, improved. If anything, since that briefing, you have a lot of real pressure around the world where a lapse of FISA could cause a pretty big dislocation of intelligence information that is geared toward protecting U.S. citizens. So my guess is they get something moving on that pretty quick, because I think they did make an impact right before the break, and I'm sure there have been a lot of follow-up meetings since then.
Well, it becomes a question about whether the government should have to seek a warrant if it's spying on a foreign national who's talking to an American citizen here, Jeannie. It's made, strange bedfellows once again. Is it progressives or conservatives who could potentially sink that idea and require a warrant? Right now, it's warrantless.
I do think I agree with Rick that I think given the situation around the world, I understand that members of the administration, CIA, FBI, and others will be on the Hill again on Wednesday talking to members. I think all of that is probably going to mean that the civil libertarian argument, if you will, is going to go down. I think it is worth remembering the data privacy amendment that went down was talking about stopping data brokers from selling consumers' information to law enforcement. That went down. That's right. Now we're talking about the the warrant requirements. Again, I predict that likely goes down. But in that, we really are giving up important liberties. Obviously, important that we have our security as well. But I think this is something that's going to continue to divide both the Democratic and the Republican parties, creating these strange bedfellows, as you talked about. And it really is very, very concerning, the fact that the United States government still does very little to protect our data and still can sweep us up in these warrants, without these warrants rather, as they are listening into what is going on abroad. So I think it's something we should all be concerned about, but I think Congress this time is going to go forward the way we always have and allow the government to continue to survey, sort of unencumbered, if you will.
Well, Jeannie, I wonder if this then becomes the thing that could potentially actually put Mike Johnson, the House Speaker, over the edge, because we know Marjorie Taylor Greene could act on the Ukraine issue if it comes to the floor, but could others join her if they're upset about his handling of FISA? I wonder if this could be the issue that, together with Ukraine aid, ultimately might do him in, or at least actually trigger that vote to try to take his gavel.
Yeah, I was wondering the same thing, Kaylee. You look at people like Warren Davidson, Jim Jordan. These are some of the people, Jim Jordan, who ran for Speaker last time around, and Davidson very, very upset by what's happened here. So I think it is absolutely a possibility that they could join forces with a Marjorie Taylor Greene in allowing his, for a vote on a motion to vacate.
All right, Rick and Jeannie, great to have both of you with us to get things rolling on a Monday. This is clearly a week that could see some important things transpire once lawmakers are back. Again, Senate here today, the House will be back tomorrow, and they'll be back with us in our late edition on Balance of Power. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano, our signature panel here on Balance of Power. It'll be interesting to see if anything comes in the next couple of days here, because we know how long it's going to take before any Ukraine legislation can be written. And they can't figure out, Kaylee, which of the two competing Republican bills on FISA to bring to the floor.
And again, we only have a handful of legislative days here because it expires on April 19th.
That's right.
So the clock is ticking in a big way. And we know that historically this Congress doesn't do anything until the clock is literally about to run out. That's just been a pattern of behavior.
How true. Yes, indeed. Let's get up to date on the news. Amy Morris is standing by with world and national headlines in the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom here in Washington. Hi, Amy.
Hi, Joe. The solar eclipse is now making its way across North America. It is the first total eclipse visible in the U.S. since 2017. It'll be the last one seen here until 2044. A partial eclipse is showing up in the central part of the country, where the path of totality, where the sun is completely covered by the moon, has just started in Texas. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is vowing to carry out Rafah's invasion, declaring, quote, "There is a date." The Israeli army is pulling out its last major combat brigade from southern Gaza. Netanyahu says they'll still be working for the release of the hostages. Former President Donald Trump declining to get behind a nationwide ban on abortion. On his Truth Social account, he said states need to decide their own limitations.
Like Ronald Reagan, I am strongly in favor of exceptions for rape, incest, and life of the mother. You must follow your heart of this issue, but remember, you must also win elections to restore our culture and, in fact, to save our country, which is currently and very sadly a nation in decline.
Trump also says he strongly supports access to in vitro fertilization. Maryland Governor Wes Moore is set to visit Capitol Hill this week. He'll be discussing funding for reconstructing the Francis Scott Key Bridge. Moore estimates that maritime operations in the Port of Baltimore could resume as early as next month. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris. This is Bloomberg.
It's 1:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all advancing right now. Little change. That's the bottom line with the S&P up less than 0.1%, as is the Dow and as is the NASDAQ Composite Index. S&P up 3 right now, 5207. We've got the Dow up 26 points, while NASDAQ higher now by 9. 10-year at 4.41% with a 2-year now yielding 4.77%. Bond yields are hitting 2024 highs with inflation in focus. We get the CPI report on Wednesday. Spot gold up $8 the ounce to $23.38, up 0.4%, while West Texas Intermediate crude oil is down 55 cents a barrel now, down 0.7%, $86.35 on WTI. Blackstone has agreed to pay about $10 billion to acquire Apartment Income REIT, the latest sign that the real estate manager sees a right moment to invest in property. Shares of Blackstone, they're up 1.5%, whereas Air Communities now by 22. Again, little change for the U.S. stock. S&P, NASDAQ all of less than 0.1%. American. Once again, your hosts, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyons.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you, and appreciate your being with us here on the Monday edition of Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew here in Washington alongside Kaylee Lyons, Bloomberg Radio, YouTube, and Bloomberg TV, as Janet Yellen wraps the big trip, her second to China in 9 months. And it's interesting, as each member of the administration kind of delivers their own message here, Kaylee, creating a composite that Beijing can react to. In this case, though, urging our competitor to rethink their economic strategy is an interesting way to go about it.
Yeah, well, her primary concern is that because China is dealing with kind of a multifaceted issue in their own economy, including the property sector, which has been really weak for some period of time, they've been investing a lot in their industrial base, into manufacturing, and potentially creating, if you listen to the Treasury Secretary's concerns, more supply than the world is actually going to be able to absorb.
They're dumping
and that was
everything.
The message that she brought. The question is, was it heated? Will it be heated?
Well, that's true. Whether we're talking EVs or solar panels, this has a direct impact on our industries here. It's not lost on us that today the administration announcing billions for Taiwan Semiconductor to come here to start building foundries.
Yep, another fab they're planning in Arizona. All of that, of course, is part of a big push we have seen in semiconductors and chips in particular. But it all speaks to this idea that the U.S. is not trying to decouple from China. They are trying to diversify the supply chain, including bringing more here at home, while also normalizing this relationship, simultaneously trying to protect national security interests at the same time. It all is a very difficult picture that Janet Yellen and others in the administration face as they try to navigate this relationship. And we want to go now to someone who knows this relationship quite well. He's Lieutenant General Robert Walsh, Academy Securities Advisory Board member. He's also former Commanding General of the Marine Corps Combat Development Command. General, great to have you here on Bloomberg Television and Radio. You helped develop the 2018 National Military Strategy and National Defense Strategy, in which China is defined as a strategic competitor. This is language that we hear a lot. What is your assessment right now of how the U.S. is treating China in this strategic competition? What exactly does that mean?
I think the relationship has certainly changed a lot from the days where we considered them a strategic partner. I think if you look at Secretary Yellen's visit and President Biden's call with President Xi Jinping last week, we've seen that the competition is very clear. And now I think the U.S. administration is really trying to thread a needle by maintaining relationships, trying to improve relationships with China, because they kind of dipped off for a while there, but try to improve those relationships, but still try to protect U.S. technology. And specifically, the Biden administration would like to be a leader in the green energy area in the globe. And they see China rapidly moving into that area. You mentioned EVs as one. And so that's an area is the Biden administration tries to create jobs in both the semiconductor industry and also the EV industry and the green energy. They see China's ability to over-manufacture and increase production, along with state-owned enterprise subsidies, to be able to reduce prices and potentially flood the market and cause damage to the ability of the U.S. to manufacture here in the U.S.
Well, just to get back, General, to where Kaylee started here, let's go back to your view in 2018. That designation, strategic competitor, that you came up with in that piece of work has been repeated ever since by administrations, including this one. We've heard Joe Biden say more than once that China is someone we want to have a competition with and not a conflict. We've seen some interesting footwork around jargon here, from decoupling to, I can't even remember what some of the other ones were at this point. Back where you were in 2018, if you looked at the relationship today, how would you have described it then?
I would describe it that China's continuing on the path that they've been on. How they've vocalized that or put that out from an information standpoint is different. And back then, when we really started to see them come online as what we considered a strategic competitor, they had just come out with Made in China 2025, which was a key blueprint or strategy that laid out how China wanted to dominate the globe in technology, listed in areas like AI, quantum computing, robotics, into semiconductors, those sort of things that we saw them saying that they're going to lead the globe in. They kind of pulled that off the table and became kind of quiet for a while because it got a lot of adverse publicity around the globe that China was going to dominate and put others out of business. And since that time, we've seen them really march along that path. And now, one of the things I think we're definitely seeing is the Biden administration seeing that. When we talk about, high-tech capabilities, dual-use capabilities such as semiconductors, we can look at how they dominate areas in rare earth minerals, some of the things that make batteries, like those type of materials, dominate those areas that not only can have a military impact on the U.S., but now we're seeing more of a competition on the economic side. And I think the real wake-up call is coming is the U.S. military and the Department of Defense has really studied China's military growth. What we're seeing is the Chinese Communist Party is really leading to much more towards economic dominance across the road through their Belt Road Initiative.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the military aspect of this relationship as well, because, of course, when Biden and Xi Jinping had their summit out in California in November, part of that was trying to normalize military-to-military communications, which had stopped for a period of time. And as Yellen was in China, we got news that the U.S. and China had resumed a dialogue basically aimed at preventing an inadvertent clash. How high, General, in your mind, is the risk of an accident, of some kind of miscalculation, while we're still working on normalizing that communication? How much room for potential error, perhaps very significant error, is there?
No, I think it's a great point, Kaylee. They did begin those discussions. In fact, the first call came from President Biden to Xi in July 22, and like you mentioned at the APEC summit, they had another discussion. It's really, we have to keep the lines of communication open. Even as a competitor, which is completely different than we had with the Cold War with the Soviet Union, we always kept the lines of communication open so we don't have misunderstanding of each other. Certainly in the South China Sea and the East China Sea, we see the Chinese military, the PLA, being very aggressive. Certainly around the Philippine Islands, we see that. And the risk of having a misjudgment, whether it's, aircraft, ships at sea, there's always that danger. And one of the things I think that also concerns us is the Chinese military has been very aggressive in their actions. They have not been tested since 1979 in a war with Vietnam. And we just are concerned that the rhetoric that comes out of the Chinese military, that is almost sometimes that they're almost itching for a fight, where the U.S. is trying to have clear lines of communication open so we don't run into a situation like that.
You mentioned China's plans for 2025, General. It was an Air Force General, Mike Minahan, who just about a year ago was out with a memo that some reporters got their hands on, urging his officers to prepare for a conflict with China as soon as 2025. Will he end up looking right?
I think our perspective on that is, as you weigh it all, as we look at the framework we kind of use as DIME, as diplomacy, information, military, and economic levers of power. Those are the things that kind of you can use as a national power to be able to try to coerce and compromise with a competitor. And I think in this case, if you really look at Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party, the one thing they want to do is stay in power. Staying in power means keeping their people happy. And I think economically, that's the most important thing for them right now, is to try to lead the globe economically. So though we see that they put out the rhetoric that by 2027, they'd be ready to take Taiwan militarily, we certainly have to be ready, and the Biden administration is doing everything they can to try to deter anything like that occurring. But at the end of the day, in the near term, though they've got the capability that continues to grow and in many ways outpace our own U.S. military, what we're seeing, though, is I think they want to lead more globally. And that's why I think you see this discussion between the Biden administration, between Janet Yellen with Commerce Secretary Raimondo, all going towards this economic area, because I think that's where we really see the Chinese trying to dominate. And they would do this strategically by starting with things like, in Africa, in South America, in the Caribbean, those areas where they can get these rare earth minerals, things like cobalt and lithium, which can put them ahead in some of these high-tech areas to include some of the green energy capabilities.
He's a board member at Academy Securities. Retired Lieutenant General Robert Walsh, it's great to have you with us, General. Thank you for your insights today on Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington alongside Kaylee Lyons as we edge ever closer to the moment here on Eclipse Day. We're not going to see the total eclipse in Washington, Kaylee, although we have secured glasses because we can still look at this. What are we going to get, about half the eclipse? Go ahead. Go.
I have no idea.
No. Let's bring.
But
Kaylee.
I do have the glasses.
Yeah,
the problem is inside the studio.
Right. You can't see anything. It's kind of like putting welding goggles on. We're sharing the screen with the sun right now, by the way. Look at this eclipse happen live. This is a strange scenario, but we want to talk to somebody who's got a different angle on this. And boy, if it ever said Bloomberg, right? David Becker, energy clean tech reporter at Bloomberg. He's going to see even less of the eclipse than we are in Washington because he's in San Francisco. David, it's great to see you. I keep hearing that this is a difficult day for the solar industry, and I guess I can understand why, but it seems like an awfully literal way to look at an eclipse day since we're not going to get another one of these until the 2040s. Are you doing all right over there? This is
we're doing
you can't see anything.
It's
all right. Well, yeah.
If you look
tell me about it, David. How much of a problem is this for the solar industry?
It's a pretty predictable one. I mean, that's the nice thing with eclipses. You know exactly where they're going to strike and when, so everybody can plan around something like this. But if you look across the entire United States, now that we have a lot of large-scale solar power installed all over the place, by the time this event is done, we will have lost about 30 gigawatts of electricity on the grid that we would have had otherwise. And if you want a good way to visualize 30 gigawatts, a single gigawatt is about the output of a nuclear reactor. It can power 750,000 homes. So this is a lot of power.
So this is why we have batteries, right?
Well, but that becomes the question with solar and so much, David, of this kind of new green technology is you need to be able to store it for situations like there's an eclipse and you can't suddenly be pulling power from the sun to the extent you would on any other day. Granted, we're not going to have this particular problem for another 20 years, but it kind of speaks to the issue we have in consistency in things like solar and wind.
Yeah, indeed. You do need to be able to store it and be able to tap that energy when you need it. But also just being able to plan around it makes a huge amount of difference. I covered one of these eclipses back in 2017 here in California when we were still one of the few states that have a lot of large-scale solar power. And we didn't have a lot of batteries back then. We barely had any hooked up to the grid. And the grid managers knew pretty much exactly how much of a bite this was going to take out of power production. They knew when it was going to happen, and everything kind of went off without a hitch. We didn't have any blackouts or anything like that.
So nothing to see here. Move right along. You really can't see anything while you're wearing these glasses. David Baker, thank you for being with us. Bloomberg Energy Clean Tech reporter. Keep your batteries handy. Do Carol and Tim have the glasses? I can't see them.
I don't have them, but man, I'm feeling kind of jealous. You guys look pretty cool. I feel like I'm at a Devo concert or something. For those of you who don't know,
I kind of feel like I'm at one.
It's like
Oh my God! And you know what I love? Bloomberg. We take a story, right? We find the business angle, whether it's solar
That's
or
correct.
There
like
always
the
is
economic
one.
impact.
All right, I've got the
Yeah,
glasses.
they were
but I
selling
can't-
solar
Tim
stocks.
has
I can't
glasses.
see you guys.
Go for it.
Got the
Yeah,
glasses.
no,
it's very dark.
I just don't know what to do. Do I
impossible.
wear them over my regular glasses? That's the question, right?
Oh.
You know, look, you guys are on the air when this happens, though,
I was
right?
going to
Are you
say,
gonna bring
Joe,
us some live coverage here?
thanks for raining on the parade, Joe. It's a moot point. I don't even know why I have glasses because we're going to be on air when this happens in New York.
I've actually
But it is a
Just in
beautiful
time,
day
Caitlin.
here.
I've said, Tim, go outside and like check it out because he's been so looking forward to this.
I haven't
So
checked with my boss, but Carol says it's okay. What do
just
you guys
scoot out.
think?
You know, you just
Yeah.
say sorry later,
Absolutely.
right? That's what you do. Hey, listen, having said that, we're going to talk a little bit about economic reports. That's what we do at Bloomberg. We got another big inflation print, you guys, coming up this week.
Yeah, we're also going to talk a little bit about Jamie Dimon's letter. Did you guys see this a little earlier today? Likening AI to essentially the next industrial revolution. That's important.
Didn't mention the eclipse, though. What's up with that, Diamond?
Well, you know,
Come on.
he did have many years to plan for it. So.
Knock on productivity.
He just didn't have glasses. That was
The
probably
knock on
the
eclipse
issue.
productivity, though,
Exactly.
will be helped by AI, right?
Exactly.
Sure.
I'll meet you on the roof.
See you there.
Thanks,
guys
you
look
guys,
so
for
cool.
humoring us. Yeah, can't see the clock when it's like that, though. Yeah, they really are dark. All right. Happy eclipse. Bloomberg Business Week is straight ahead.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenivek on Bloomberg Radio.
And a very happy Monday, everybody. This is Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Master along with Tim Stenivek. We're live on radio, TV, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals on this total eclipse Monday, April 8th. I know Tim has his glasses.
I got my glasses right here.
He's getting
Carol.
ready.
Yeah, but you know, we are going to see this in New York. About an hour and a half. So, yeah, maybe I'll sneak out and take a look at the sky.
Don't tell the producers.
And maybe I won't, actually.
All right, on this total eclipse Monday, folks, bond yields hitting essentially their highs for the year here in 2024. This is we get ready for another important inflation print. So that's kind of where we start today.
Yeah, we got a lot of economic data points to focus on. We're going to talk about Wednesday's CPI release, plus everything that Jamie Dimon talked about in his annual letter. When he speaks or writes, everybody listen. Jamie Dimon, by the way, on Friday, will be talking about JP Morgan earnings too.
Yeah, he talked a lot about AI, not about an eclipse, but about artificial intelligence. All right, also, we're going to get into the 10 companies to watch for this second quarter, some for good reasons, some for bad reasons, but these are names you should have on your radar.
And speaking of companies to watch, shares of Tesla kick into high gear on a product that Elon Musk has promised for years. Now he's saying it's going to be unveiled in just a few months.
And you know, we mentioned that inflation print that's coming your way on Wednesday. Well, when it comes to higher prices, you know what costs more, Tim?
I do know.
Yeah, an Ivy League education.
Yeah, college.
That's our one more thing. We're going to get to that in just a moment. First up, though, let's get a check on the market and your top business stories. Here is Charlie Pellet.
Hi, thank you very much. And here's what's going on. We have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all advancing. We'll throw in the Russell 2000 and the NASDAQ 100 index as well. Stocks are pushing higher with the S&P now up by about 7 to 52.11. That is a gain right now of 0.1%. Dow Jones Industrial Average up 48, up 0.2%. While NASDAQ is up 22 points, higher now by 0.1%. The 10-year 4.41% with a 2-year that's yielding 4.77%. Gold up 0.4%, 23.39 a barrel or an ounce. And speaking of barrels, West Texas Intermediate crude lower now by 0.7%, 86.33 a barrel on WTI. JP Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon says artificial intelligence may be the biggest issue his bank is grappling with. He likened its potential impact to that of the steam engine and said the technology could augment virtually every single job. Shares of JP Morgan Chase are up now by about 0.5%. JP Morgan Chase does report earnings Friday, along with rivals Citigroup up 0.8%. Wells Fargo also reports on Friday. Wells Fargo up now by about 0.8%. Bottom line, Eclipse Monday, stocks higher. S&P right now up 5, a gain there of 0.1%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Carol Master along with Tim Stenivek live here on Bloomberg Business Week. So, Tim, we do get an inflation report on Wednesday. We've got Fed minutes as well from the last Fed meeting, FOMC meeting. Then we got PPI on Thursday.
Yeah, inflation again, or really always on our mind, certainly. Jay Powell and company's mind. This is U.S. Treasuries across the curve move up. Carol, you mentioned this earlier. 10-year yields hitting the highest level since November.
Yeah.
Also within striking distance of that 4.5% level that some investors are watching as a threshold that could determine whether rates will revisit last year's high hit in roughly October.
All right, so we got a few things on our mind today. All right, let's get to it, and let's check in with Michael McKee, international economics and policy correspondent here at Bloomberg News, here in studio. All right, Mike, so let's talk CPI first.
Talk any of the PIs.
Any of the I's. He knows all the I's.
All right, so talk the inflation reports. We're expecting, right, our survey somewhat of an easing, but I feel like when we get down to kind of the year's process, we get into the granular and even small moves. So, like, what are the nuances you're going to be watching for in this report?
What the Fed is basically going to be watching for, which of course is what I'm going to be watching for, is what categories are producing inflation, and are they sort of one-offs, or are they a continuing problem that is going to suggest whether inflation will continue to fall or not. Obviously, housing has been an issue. That's been the biggest issue because it's the biggest part of CPI, and it hasn't declined as fast as anybody thought it would. So everybody's first look is going to go to shelter costs and see what those are. We'll look at as Steve Staley of Santander calls it, the fearsome five, which includes things like hotel and airline charges and used cars, and so we'll see where there is a problem. We know there's going to be an energy component to the headline,
right?
But we'll see what goes into the core.
Mike, what would you have to see in order to think that, okay, the Fed is now going to get knocked off its path of setting to cut this year?
Oh, I think you'd have to see inflation rise significantly. They're still on track to cut. It's a question of when and by how much. Now, this is a moving target.
There are a lot of people out there, Torsten Slok among them, who have been saying for months that the Fed is not going to cut this year. So if I were to ask them that question, they'd say, well, just keep seeing more of the same, and we won't see the Fed cut. But you're arguing that, they'd have to see a lot of inflation.
Well, what is more of the same? If it's a continued grind slower, the Fed may feel they get to a point by the end of this year where they can cut rates because inflation is not coming back, even though the economy is growing more quickly than they anticipated. They're going to have to feel sure it won't bounce back. One of the good things that we've seen is, like we saw in the jobs numbers last week, that average hourly earnings go down a little bit. And so if that's the case, then the Fed is a little bit less worried about the labor market remaining strong. It's the bottom line of all of this is they don't know. They paid Torsten and other economists to make definitive pronouncements, and the Fed likes to hide under its desk and peek out and go, what does it look like outside?
Yeah. And how does the market take it, right?
Yeah.
To some extent, I think.
Which is one reason we get into all this interesting stuff, because the market people like to beat on the Fed for not giving them the directions that they want.
Sometimes I think Joe or Jane on Wall Street, or Main Street rather, are like, well, wait a minute. Okay, so CPI, which if I look at core, is supposed to come in at, what, an increase of 0.3% month over month. And then year over year, I think a 3.7% rate. So if it's 0.1% more or less, is that a big deal? Like, this is where I feel like we will spend a lot of time on it, but is it? If the
core comes in 1/10 higher on a year-over-year basis, or even on a month-over-month basis, then I think the markets will buy into the idea that there's definitely not going to be 3 rate cuts this year. I mean, they've sort of bought into that as of today, but that'll harden in investors' minds. If they get to anything higher than that, then they're going to start pricing out the second rate cut, and we'll be at 1. But of course, 1 month doesn't make a trend, so I think the markets and the Fed will need a couple more to get a real idea of where we're going to be.
So last fall, when bond yields rose, there was this chatter about how the bond market was helping the Fed do its job. And I'm wondering if we're going to start seeing that again, with the 10-year approaching highs since November and approaching the highest of the year.
Well, the interesting thing is that the Fed has had rates where they are for quite some time, and we have not seen a major impact on the economy. We're still growing somewhere between 2.5% and 3%, which is kind of amazing under the circumstances. So everybody's waiting to see when we get an effect. Now, obviously, housing has been impacted, and autos have been impacted some, and they're the sensitive areas for interest rates. But the economy itself hasn't slowed down, and businesses don't seem to be preparing for any kind of recession. So then it becomes a question of, and all right, I'll go there. R star.
He said it.
And the nerd stuff of whether or not we're seeing a higher neutral rate. In other words, the economy can grow faster than the Fed thinks, and so to bring down any economic or any inflation, you have to raise rates higher. And that'll be a question for later in the year.
All right, interesting stuff, and certainly stuff we're keeping on our radar. Mike, as always, and glad you went there to R-Star. We always appreciate it.
He is R-Star. Michael McKee is R-Star.
No!
There are people who would throw me out of any bar in New York for mentioning that word.
There might be one on
Get him
Wall
out of
Street.
here. All right, Mike McKee, International Economics and Policy Correspondent. All right, now let's get to, that is certainly on our radar, but let's get to one of our most read stories that's definitely on our radar today. And this is the Wall Street Voice, Tim, everyone listens to, who's talking
talking about AI and steam engines, and that's where we're going to go now.
Yeah, that voice, JP Morgan Chief Executive Officer Jamie Dimon, out with his annual shareholder letter, always a must-read, of course, for the investment community. And in it, Dimon devoted a chunk to the importance of artificial intelligence, saying it may be the biggest issue that his bank is grappling with. Let's get into it with Sally Bakewell, Bloomberg News America's finance team leader. She joins us here into the studio. Sally, as always, the annual letter, chock full of stuff to talk about, but AI seems to really be getting the attention right now. I'm wondering how you see Jamie Dimon presenting this as a challenge that his bank is dealing with rather than an opportunity.
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, we watch Jamie Dimon not just because he's the CEO of the biggest American bank, but because he, perhaps more than any of his big banking peers, kind of weighs in a more forceful and powerful way, and we really listen when he does. And that's exactly what he did in this letter and with AI, which, you know, he did take the moment to outline the sort of bad actors that, you know, you have to be very careful of and on your guard toward. But he said that the bank has been, you know, over the past 10 years, doubling down on the technology. It has amassed thousands of data science experts and AI experts. It's beginning to explore generative AI, and it's continuing to invest. So I think the opportunity, you know, probably surpasses the level of the challenge it is for them to make sure that they are using the technology in the right way.
Remind us, because, you know, it was Tom Keene who was talking on surveillance, and he's like, you know, why doesn't every CEO kind of write this kind of a letter and stuff? And I think it was Sonali who answered, Sonali Basak, who said, you know, not everybody has, first of all, has seen so many different market cycles and difficult cycles and has come out shining, right? And has done really well, has managed them. And this is why when Jamie Dimon, Sally, talks about something, we kind of care.
That's right. I mean, he's the longest-serving bank CEO of the big U.S. banks, and he's the only one that is still there since the, you know, the financial crisis.
Remarkable,
and,
right?
Indeed, and he went through the financial crisis, and he has this very expansive perspective, and he has, you know, the data of J.P. Morgan at his fingertips. The amount of sort of economic knowledge and the breadth of economic knowledge he has is obviously worth listening to.
Just to follow on AI, I mean, AI not new to Wall Street. We know that, but it does sound like Jamie Dimon is spending even more attention or efforts, money, focus on the bank when it comes to artificial intelligence, and especially when it comes to generative AI.
Yeah, I think, you know, he today really outlined the potential of this technology, you know, to transform essentially the world. It's not just about his business, although he said that it could completely transform some of their business lines, but it will have a huge ramifications for society at large. And that's why he introduced, you know, the steam engine, the printing press, the internet. He's likening
things that changed our worlds forever, right?
Exactly. He's likening it. He's putting it in that bucket.
Yeah, I guess one thing that I think about when we hear that is where the opportunities are. I mean, certainly we talk a lot about NVIDIA and the opportunities when it comes to tech companies, but if it really does touch every company, I mean, where does someone like Jamie Dimon see the opportunities here?
Well, I mean, he said today that he could see it having the potential to augment virtually every job. Every
right,
job, yeah. And, you know, it could make people more. He has also said, if you recall, that, you know, it could cut down the working day for a lot of people to about 3.5 days. AI could help in that regard. I mean, I think for banks, the opportunities are sort of near limitless. You know, there's their trading operations, their trading algorithms, and sort of from the hiring perspective and the talent perspective, you know, these banks are increasingly filing patents for AI, to use AI in these sort of operations. And it's just a general huge efficiency push, and they are so competitive. Expenses matter. Anything they can do to bring those things down, and AI is one way of doing it.
We talked about the 4-day work week last week.
I was just thinking
about
about
the 3.5 day
exactly.
work week. How does that sound to you?
Any takers for 2-day work week? No, it's just kind of interesting from the financial community. That was I can't
Steve Cohen.
Steve Cohen, forgive me. But also who said not his workers, anybody who's managing a portfolio. You know, market's open, you got to be there. But it is interesting to hear from these financial types that were very much, especially post-pandemic, after a little bit of while, are like, we want you back in the office. So it's interesting to hear him talk about, and I understand he's talking about AI across a lot of different industries, how it could impact the world. Mm-hmm. What was the most surprising thing in this letter?
I mean,
he covers a lot of stuff always.
He did. I think what was surprising was he has come out swinging against a number of things. Regulation, the Basel Endgame proposals. He's been a long-time outspoken critic. He went a little deeper on that. You know, he's said for a while that these regulations will harm Americans, that they're arbitrary, that they're rife with duplication. All of these things emerged in the letter again, but he actually this time said, you know, bank management boards and bank teams, our relationships with regulators are actually deteriorating and are not that good, which was quite a surprising, nuanced comment to make. And you also sort of implied that regulators don't necessarily know exactly what they're doing, because he said a lot of them have not been practitioners in the industry. So it's just one level above. And he also took aim at shareholder proxy advisory firms. He has sort of long lambasted investors who rely solely on those firms, like
Called that
ISS.
two major, right? Yeah.
Exactly, two major ones in the US, ISS and Glass Lewis. He says investors should do their own homework. They shouldn't rely on these firms for recommendations for how they should vote their stock on contentious issues like executive compensation, or whether a merger should go through, or a climate policy. He says, do your own homework, and don't. And how do you know that what they're providing is accurate? He actually went out after the firms and said, that they have too much sway and undue influence. Were his words.
Interesting.
Big picture, at least in the near term, he doesn't seem as optimistic as some others about the U.S. economy and the idea of a soft landing being all but guaranteed.
Yes, that's right. Market expectations that soft landing is sort of 70, putting it at 70 to 80%. He says the odds would be much lower than that. He continued to sort of couch that sort of assessment of the economy where consumers remain resilient and they're still spending, but there is this huge overhang of sort of inflationary pressures, of quantitative tightening, and of course this very fractious geopolitical background with wars in Ukraine and the Middle East, and all of these things make it could sort of add up to a very unprecedented situation which we can't predict.
Any weather references this time around?
Not that I recall.
Forgot to search for them.
I will say, to that point, Carol, he did talk about interest rates ranging from 2% all the way up to 8%. So that could be looked at as some sort of weather prediction.
That's true, but they're ready for any scenario, is his point,
That's
right?
what he said.
That they're ready to do it. Anything, well, I wonder if that's kind of a setup, if I think about on Friday when we get the jobs report. That's a great way to kind of be like, hey guys, we're on it.
Right.
Ahead of earnings.
Right. Yeah, it's always interesting that this comes out just before earnings and they report on Friday. And I think, the big thing that we are all looking at in earnings will be how banks alter their guidance for net interest income, which is essentially their biggest source of revenue as banks, because, the trajectory of interest rates will have a huge impact on that.
Mike, are you looking for me to bring you in?
No, I was just kind of arching my eyebrows when Sally was saying that, because what the banks think is, it'd be interesting to compare to what investors in futures and swaps think about how many rate cuts the Fed's, where we're going to end up with the rates.
It's a great point, right? And we'll see it ultimately.
Yeah.
Because does feel like there's quite a...
I'm going to wait for Sally's team to write a headline that says, investors say diamond wrong, or something like that.
Do you think it's going to happen? Everybody raise their hand. Good stuff. Glad. Thank you for weighing in there, Mike. I really appreciate it, Sally. Great setup for Friday's earnings release from JP Morgan. Sally Bakewell, of course. Sally is America's finance team leader at Bloomberg News here in studio, along with Mike McKee here in studio. You're listening and watching Bloomberg Business Week. This is Bloomberg.
It's 2:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Stocks are holding on to gains. S&P right now up 6, a little changed, up by about 0.1%. We've got the Dow up 41, also higher by 0.1%, while the Nasdaq Composite Index is up 28 points now, higher by 0.2%. 10-year 4.41%, with a 2-year that's yielding 4.77%. Spot gold is advancing $10 the ounce to $23.39, up 0.4%. M West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.5%, 86.44 for a barrel of WTI. Oil is retreating from a 5-month high after Israel said it would remove some troops from Gaza. Shares of oil companies right now, they are also trading a little change right now. Among some of those names, ExxonMobil up by about 0.1%. ADRs of BP up 0.8%. Chevron flat on the day right now, up by less than 0.1%. Again, recapping the Dow, the S&P, Nasdaq eclipse Monday. We have got the S&P up 6 now, up 0.1%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. All right, Tim, so what happens when our Bloomberg Intelligence analysts sort through the barrel to find the good apples across sectors and regions, a group of companies that come from a larger group of high-confidence focus ideas that BI identifies on an ongoing basis? Do you know what happens?
I know what happens because, well, I prepared for the segment.
You did.
But what they do is they come up with, at least this time around, the 10 companies to watch in the second quarter. This story featured in the new issue of Business Week magazine. It's available on newsstands, on the Bloomberg terminal, and at bloomberg.com/business.
All right, so let's get more on those 10 companies. Back with us, Bloomberg Intelligence Senior European Strategist and Director of Research Content, Tim Craighead. He is joining us from London. Tim, we always love going through these lists with you. So take it away. We kind of set it up. Is there anything we need, anything else we need to know is how you guys curated this list?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. And yeah, I would say that one of the things that happens when we come up and do these sort of things is that the Business Week folks come up with some really cool graphics in the magazine, and in particular, if you look at it on the online version. But suffice to say, from Bloomberg Intelligence's perspective, this list of 10, you referred to it, is part of a broader list of what we call focus ideas. And the focus ideas are companies where we've got a very strong fundamental view, a high conviction view, that we think is differentiated from the market and what the market seems to be discounting, as it relates to the stocks and whatnot. And importantly, there's a catalyst ahead that we think can change the market's point of view, assuming we're correct. And importantly, with these 10 companies that we focused on here, they all have really key catalysts coming up for the second quarter. And that's why we've picked these. There's 2 of them that are cautious views. There's 8 of them that are positive views. They span sectors, they span regions. And yeah, that's the setup.
Okay, so let's talk about some of those sectors. I want to start with tech and innovation because a couple, and these are not, I would argue that not every one of these companies on here is a household name, and certainly some of them are on the smaller side. So talk about what you found in tech and innovation and what the team found there.
Yeah, absolutely. So, there's an awful lot going on in the world of technology these days about AI. You can't not talk about it. And there's 2 companies here that we've got on the list that are related to artificial intelligence. One is Salesforce, which is the world's largest infrastructure software company. And notwithstanding how big this company is, it still actually may not be a household name, given the nature of the beast. Importantly, any company that is looking at all the information they get from their customers probably relies on Salesforce and their software programs. And they're going through 2 things right now. One is a big tech infrastructure software spending cycle that we think is gaining momentum. And then secondly, is the need for information to feed AI programs and initiatives. And Salesforce is right smack in the middle of all of this. The other one is a company called Tencent. And if you're in China, you definitely know about Tencent. It has a lot of things going on within the world of online gaming. Importantly, from our perspective, they've gotten into short videos, and AI is enhancing the way that they're generating revenue from advertising. Both of those are feeding Tencent's business that we think is underappreciated by the market. The last one I would mention is a company not in the world of classic tech, but technology in the world of medicine, a company called Penumbra.
That's the one I was thinking of when I say not a household name.
Exactly. So these guys make computer-assisted vacuum technology products. And you say, what is that? Think blood clots. And usually the way you treat blood clots is with anticoagulant drugs. And they've got all sorts of other ramifications. Penumbra's computer-assisted vacuum technology can go in and actually suck blood clots out of arteries and veins, even really small ones, and you don't have to take the drugs. It's great. And again, all three of these we think could generate better than anticipated revenue, margins, earnings.
And I just want to mention, when you talked about Salesforce, we actually spoke with Alice Steinglass, Executive VP General Manager over at Salesforce, and they talked about the role of Gen AI and the role of data and making it ready for their customers. So she kind of got into some of the growth initiatives that you referred to. Another theme we want to touch on, and that has to do with actually two Chinese companies. Walk us through that.
Yeah, so China is certainly having its challenges. I think you all are clearly very well aware of what's going on in the world of Chinese property. It's definitely under pressure on all sorts of different fronts. And there's also other issues. The stock market has fallen and whatnot. There's regulatory measures that are being put in place to try to curtail some of these problems and change the course. Part of those are actually putting a damper on what's going on in the world of initial public offerings and secondary market offerings in the stock market. And CSC Financial is one of China's biggest brokerage firms. And we think that they are due to disappoint through the first half of the year because of this. Another one is a company called Chow Tai Fook. It's based in Hong Kong. It's the biggest Hong Kong-based China jeweler retail company. If you're in Hong Kong, you definitely know Chow Tai Fook. And it's interesting because not only is there a negative effect because of what's going on with property and consumer sentiment on jewelry purchases, but Hong Kongers specifically are going to find things cheaper on the mainland. They're going across the border. And all of this, we think, is driving a disappointing trend for Hong Kong retail sales, and Chow Tai Fook is a poster child for this. So both of those are concerns.
As you said, great illustrations by the Bloomberg Business Week team. It's all about apples, and these apples are a little bit bruised. So kind of fun to see that go along. We got another sector.
Yeah, I want to talk construction here. Some interesting names from the Bloomberg Intelligence team talking about potential beneficiaries of a construction boom. What did you find, Tim?
Well, so Taylor Morrison is a home builder, and they're ones that focus on larger communities. They've got more and more growth coming from Arizona and Florida. And we think that there's an opportunity to see better margin improvement given the way that they're driving their business, pure and simple. Oshkosh is more on the bigger commercial side, and it's not only construction, but they also do other commercial vehicles like fire trucks or ambulances or the new postal service electric vehicle. So all sorts of projects there. But generally, there's concern that on that commercial side, that there's a down cycle actually that's developing. And we think Oshkosh is going to be able to actually surprise on the positive because they've had such a big backlog and some of these new initiatives that are playing through to the revenue stream.
All right, finally, a sector we love to talk about in travel. And you got two names in that. Walk us through those two. Accor is one of them?
Yes. So there's one that's absolutely classic travel, and the other I'm stretching things a little bit by suggesting travel.
I mean, the Michelin Guide was created for a reason. I think it's fair to say. It's just a little preview.
Like there you go.
We're helping you out there.
Yeah. So Accor is a hotel company. And I think a lot of the listeners here have probably stayed at one of their hotels. They go from the very high end to more modest economy brands. The thing that anybody who stayed in a hotel recently has probably found is how expensive it is. It's pretty shocking sometimes what the rates are that you have to pay. That's feeding Accor's revenue. There is a global travel cycle that we think is stronger and longer, and Accor is in the front of that, both from a Europe and an Asian travel base. Interesting, they are French. Their home is in France, and it's only a small part of their overall portfolio. But the Paris Olympics this summer are the catalyst we're looking for, because pretty soon we're going to start to see the early bookings that they release in terms of the Paris Olympics, and it should be quite robust. The other one.
20 seconds, though. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes. Pirelli, it's a tire company. And yes, you have to travel if you get in your car and you spin those tires. They are moving their production bases to Mexico and Romania. It's cheaper, and they're curtailing the low end of their tires to high end, and so there's an upgrade cycle. We think both of those can create positive surprise.
This is not the F1 tire that we're talking about specifically.
It is the F1 Pirelli tire.
Okay,
yes.
good. Okay.
There you go.
Always love these lists. Names that we know, names that we don't, but definitely you give us the reasons to keep them on our radar. So appreciate it. Tim Tate, thank you so much. Bloomberg Intelligence Senior European Strategist, Director of Research Content, our own Tim Craighead, joining us there from London.
Hey, from London to Washington, D.C. we go for a check the latest world and national news with Amy Morris in the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom. Hey, Amy.
Hey, Tim, the eclipse is underway across the country. Right now in Texas, they are experiencing the total eclipse. Here in Washington, it's just getting started and is expected to reach its peak at 3:20 Eastern Time. This is the first total eclipse visible in the U.S. since 2017. We're not going to see another one like it until 2044. About 24 New York state courts, meanwhile, have closed or limited proceedings during the solar eclipse. State officials say this is just to ensure everyone's safety. Some courts are closed as of noon today. Others are operating on a limited basis for emergency proceedings only. The northern part of New York State is in the path of totality. Officials do expect a lot of tourists to show up, so this is just to be safe. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is vowing to carry out Rafah's invasion, declaring, quote, there is a date. The Israeli army is pulling out its last major combat brigade from southern Gaza. Netanyahu says they are also still working for the release of the hostages. Former President Donald Trump wading into the abortion debate. In a video posted on Truth Social, he says he believes abortion laws should be left up to the states.
Many states will be different. Many will have a different number of weeks, or some will have more conservative than others, and that's what they will be. At the end of the day, this is all about the will of the people.
The former president stopped short of calling for a nationwide abortion ban. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris. This is Bloomberg.
Another thing that startups need to look for is a market that is either started to undergo or is soon going to undergo exponential growth. I think this is actually related to one of the biggest mistakes investors make when evaluating startups. Investors always say, well, what's your growth rate? We care about the growth rate. Investors will forgive smallish revenue today if it's growing quickly. For some reason, people don't think about markets this way. But if you think about the most important startups, they are the ones that I start in small markets that are growing very, very quickly. 11 years ago, the market for iPhone apps was $0. It's now huge. And I think if you only think about the TAM today, you'll make a big mistake. What you really want to do is identify a market that's going to grow every year and be able to ride that up elevator.
I want a bank that shows me what I spend instantly.
We're Monzo. Give us a go. See?
I want a bank that can help me budget for the things I need, like a new leather jacket for Bingo.
We can do that.
Bingo's my cockapoo.
Hi, Bingo.
It's a real faff to sign up.
It takes less than 10 minutes.
Race you.
You're on. Time's up. How'd you get on?
It's a draw.
Is it? We hear you, Bingo. You make Monzo Monzo.
My general advice is continue to seek out companies or people that are maybe one stage or two stages ahead of you. And I think this is generalizable to not just to startups, but anyone seeking fast growth in their own professional lives, in their careers too. What does greatness look like? Try to seek out people who've been there, done that before, and then try to not connect with one, but try to interview 3, 5, 10 people to see what is a general pattern of greatness that look like that will get you to the next level of the company, next stage, maybe a year, 12 months from now, 24 months from now. Seek out people who kind of went down that path a few times. Then you'll start to find this pattern that start to emerge. What are things that you need to have 12 months from now, 24 months from now that you currently don't have? Then try to like build a path towards that. It's almost like Amazon's or Jeff Bezos' mantra of working backwards. Think about what your end game or next stage look like, and then figure out your steps to getting there, and who do you need to work with, upgrading or coaching your existing team or recruiting from somewhere else to really level your leadership. Because ultimately, the job of a CEO is to do 3 things, right? One is get the strategy right for your company, making sure it's executed, get the right teams onboarded, getting the resources, whether it be fundraising or allocating your resources. So it's strategy, people, or team, figuring out how you need to navigate those things to get to the next level.
It's 2:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ all advancing. Bottom line here, little change for stocks. S&P up just 2 points right now, with the S&P at 5207, a gain of just under 0.1%. Dow Industrials also flat on the day, up 13 points right now, up less than 0.1%. While the NASDAQ Composite Index is up 13, also up less than 0.1%. The 10-year 4.41%, with a 2-year that's yielding 4.77%. Gold up 0.4%, $23.39 for an ounce of the precious metal, and a retreat for crude. West Texas Intermediate now at 86.56 a barrel. WTI down by about 0.4%. The U.S. plans to award Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing $6.6 billion in grants and as much as $5 billion in loans to help the world's top chip maker build factories in Arizona China expanding President Biden's effort to boost domestic production of critical technology. Taiwan Semi up right now by 1.8%. Apple shares, they are trading lower, down 0.5%. NVIDIA down by 1%. TSMC is the go-to chip maker for companies that include Apple and NVIDIA. Again, recapping, S&P right now, little changed, up 2 points, up less than 0.1%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. All right, Tim, say robotaxi again.
Again? Well, get excited again?
Yeah, that's what's happening.
At least investors are.
That's exactly what's happening with shares of Tesla today. We heard Charlie talking about it. Shares of Tesla rallying. They're just off their highs of the day. They're up about 5.25%. Musk says, Elon Musk that is, says he'll unveil a Tesla robotaxi in August.
Okay, but let's do a reality check on this, on the company, on the stock, on the idea of a robotaxi coming from Tesla. After all, it's been talked about for years. The stock, by the way, Tesla that is, down 30% so far this year. With us, we had a great voice, Bloomberg News Global Autos editor Craig Trudell, joining us from our London bureau. Craig, when I hear robotaxi, I think, okay, I first heard this, I think, 2017, 2018. Like, this has been promised year after year from Elon Musk. Is this time different?
I guess time will tell. Color me skeptical.
Okay.
Maybe it's the journalist in me that has serious doubts, especially just as you say, how often he's talked about this. And Musk himself, just a few months back, referred to himself as the boy who cried FSD. FSD standing for full self-driving. And so, he's been early, I guess, to put it charitably. Time and again, and I think the industry in general, in his defense, as you say, was thinking that this would be, years out back in 2016, 2017. I think, the general sort of consensus, aside from Musk and the people who are huge fans of his, view this as more of like a decades out, question.
I mean, it's been a wacky week or two, even wacky for Elon Musk and Tesla, Craig. When I think about, going to do a $25,000 cheaper EV, not going to do it. Yes, I am going to do it, after a report. So, I mean, I don't know. Meanwhile, as Tim mentioned in the introduction, Tesla shares are one of the worst performing names near the bottom in the S&P 500, down 30% this year, after last year being one of the best performing names in the S&P 500. What is Elon up to? Is he just pulling a page from his playbook and saying, yeah, I know there's, you guys are kind of down on us, but look what we're doing. Is that what it is, or is there something more substantial, and how do we figure it out?
I think it's, it's of course something that he has consistently touted year after year, and yet I think he's leaning into it harder than he has in quite some time because he doesn't have other options. I think he does also have, some things going in his favor in terms of, generally I think a lot of Tesla customers are excited about the latest version of full self-driving. But importantly, that is still a driver support system or a driver assistance system. You still have to keep your hands on the wheel and your eyes on the road. I think the idea that he is potentially canceling or at least deprioritizing or delaying this $25,000 car is really worrisome in the sense that last week we got as good an indication as we've had yet that the Model 3 and Model Y can only take this company so far. They have cut the prices of these vehicles dramatically, and still in the first quarter of the year they had a substantial drop from a year ago and came up way short of analysts' expectations. And so they desperately need a cheaper vehicle. The question is, are they going to just kind of turn the Model 3 into that cheaper vehicle? Is that such a wise strategy when you're burning your customers and, fleet companies like Hertz? Or is this just, the way that he wants to do things? And, we know if there's anything we know about Musk, it's that, he is the one who sort of, has say with that company, and he tends to change his mind a lot.
Yeah, that is a good point. I'm wondering about this idea that how it could affect other companies. I was looking at shares of Uber, which are down today, overreaction about this potential robo-taxi. And I'm thinking, okay, are investors really concerned Are Uber investors really concerned that if Tesla comes out with a robotaxi, fewer people are going to take Ubers?
It's a good question. I do think that just the way the market is trending, the way that this robo taxi service that Musk has talked about certainly would be aimed straight for Uber. This was part of a famous blog post that Musk authored a few years back. His master plan part 2. It was this idea that people would be able to monetize their cars when they weren't using them and sort of send it out onto this Tesla service and fetch people and move goods around. Again, I just I don't think that we're anywhere close to that being something that feasibly can sort of work. And the companies that are making robo-taxi services available are doing so with extremely expensive cars. I'm talking about Waymo, for example, the company started by Google. The hardware that those vehicles are kitted out with cost a pretty penny and are not the sorts of cars that a lay consumer can just buy, even if the company was interested in putting them on the market.
And we did hear from Elon Musk, talking with the head of the investing giant Norges Bank Investment Management. They are one of Tesla's biggest shareholders. And Elon Musk said in this live stream conversation on X Spaces, there's going to be some ebb and flow in how far electric cars go, but the ultimate victory of the electric cars is inevitable, he said. But the pair did not discuss Tesla's planned robotaxi or the low-cost car, which is kind of interesting because if I was an investor in Tesla, that would be my first question, wouldn't it be?
It shocked me that conversation ended without these topics not coming up. Then again, the X Spaces that this conversation was hosted on was kind of a mess. It sort of reminded me of the Ron DeSantis kicking off of his campaign that went totally awry because they kept having technical difficulties. But I'm with you, Carol. I can't believe that as a major investor in Tesla, that given the opportunity to talk with Musk, that I wouldn't think to ask about something that so many people are counting on making up for the bulk of this company's sales in just the next few years.
So you did listen to what you could of this X Spaces because, as you mentioned in your story, it was cutting out repeatedly. What else stuck out to you from this conversation that he just had, wrapping up in the last hour or so?
Yeah, I mean, I think they did talk about this idea that EVs are inevitable. I think what was interesting to me was just how much Musk wanted to sort of talk about the culture wars and discuss this idea that a judge in Brazil is coming after him for what he's doing on X. And interestingly, the fund manager he was speaking with didn't seem to want to touch that with a 10-foot pole. I think he wanted to keep things on track and talking about happy talk. And it was interesting at some point. He even made a comment about this is all kind of negative. And it is interesting just how much Musk has sort of his persona is so much darker on X than it used to be in the old days of Twitter.
Interesting stuff. Hey, listen, so appreciate it. Bloomberg News Global Autos editor Greg Trudell joining us, of course, there from our London bureau. Coming up next, one more thing, the sticker shock of an Ivy League college education, folks. When you just thought it couldn't get worse, guess what? It can.
your company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pella. Trump Media and Technology Group shares have wiped out some $2.8 billion in value as the meme stock struggles to captivate the retail traders who help power initial gains. The social media company that's mostly owned by former President Donald Trump has slumped 37% from its close on March 26, falling below the level that the blank check firm Digital World Acquisition Corp it merged with traded at when investors approved the tie-up on March 22nd. Right now, shares of DJT, that is the ticker, down by 11%. Spirit Airlines has announced an extensive cost-cutting program less than 3 months after its proposed combination with JetBlue fell through because of antitrust concerns. The airline says it will defer all its Airbus aircraft on order for delivery in 2025 and the following year, improving Spirit's liquidity. It will also furlough 260 pilots from September 1st. Shares of Spirit, they're up now by 8.2%. The ticker, by the way, SAVE. JetBlue shares, they're up by just about 3.4%. Meanwhile, Qantas Airways is going to make millions more seats available for frequent flyers, but passengers will need to use more loyalty points to secure their tickets as the airline overhauls a model that had increasingly frustrated customers. ADRs of Qantas Airways, they're up today by 5.2%. And JP Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon says artificial intelligence may be the biggest issue his bank is grappling with. He has likened its potential impact to that of the steam engine and says the technology could augment virtually every job. Those are our top company stories, and this is Bloomberg.
You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Messer and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
It is Bloomberg Business Week. Let's get a check on the latest world and national news. For that, we go to Amy Morris in the Bloomberg at 99.1 Newsroom in Washington, D.C. Hey, Amy.
Hey, Tim, the eclipse is underway across the country. Now, here in Washington, it's just getting started and will probably reach its peak around 3:20. It'll peak in New York City at 3:25. But right now, Russellville, Arkansas is experiencing a total eclipse. It is the first total eclipse visible in the U.S. since 2017, and it'll be the last one we see here until 2044. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is vowing to carry out a Rafah invasion, declaring, quote, there is a date. Netanyahu says they are still working for the release of the hostages. Former President Trump is wading into the abortion debate. In a video he posted on Truth Social, he says he believes abortion laws should be left up to the states to decide.
Many states will be different. Many will have a different number of weeks, or some will have more conservative than others, and that's what they will be. At the end of the day, this is all about the will of the people.
The former president stopped short of calling for a nationwide ban on abortion. He did say he supports exceptions for rape, incest, or the mother's life. Actor Jonathan Majors was sentenced to probation. He managed to avoid jail time for assaulting his ex-girlfriend in a high-profile case that pretty much derailed the once promising star's career. The 34-year-old star of Creed 3 had faced up to a year behind bars after he was convicted of misdemeanor assault by a Manhattan jury back in December. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg. Carol and Tim.
Amy, have you seen the eclipse yet?
I have. I'm giddy. Positively giddy.
All right, we're counting down to New York City. We just marked down the time, as you said, 3:25 in New York City. So we're going to check it out. All right, good stuff. Amy Morris there in D.C. All right, in the meantime, as we await for our viewing, we do want to get to one more thing. And this is a story that, man, when it popped here in the newsroom, everybody was talking about.
You know when you're like, okay, well, don't worry. When my kids are older, college won't be as expensive. Well, it has not turned out that way at all.
That's not what I say to you. You know what I always say to you.
One of our colleagues was like, oh, don't worry, 15 years from now, it won't be as expensive. They're going to have to figure something out. Well, I thought that 15 years ago.
Yeah.
But they haven't figured anything out because among the most read on the Bloomberg terminal right now is a story about the sticker shock to go to an Ivy League school. Carol, drum roll, surpassing $90,000 a year for some of these schools.
Nuts. I know, $90,000 at the University of Pennsylvania, for instance. The annual cost of attendance is now well above the median household income. Median means it splits incomes here in the United States in half. Half are above, half are low. So it's above. The cost of going to University of Pennsylvania annually is well above the median household income in the U.S. Tuition fees, housing, and other expenses totaling an estimated $92,288. Cornell will run you more than $92,000, while the price is higher than $91,000 at Dartmouth and Brown. So keep in mind, Penn points out, it covers the cost for students whose families make $75,000 or less. But if you are paying the full
freight
Megillah, if you will, the full price for an Ivy League school you could talk about $350,000 for 4 years.
Yeah, that's just right now. I mean, the way that costs have gone up, if you're trying to plan for this, like some people, even if you're not planning on Ivy League schools, college is going to cost a lot of money. The increased cost of attending Ivy League school was roughly in line with a 4% increase at colleges and universities across the U.S. This is according to the Common Fund Institute. Tuition for the next academic year at Brown jumped 4.5%. At Dartmouth, including fees, it rose 3.8%. And at Yale, the bill including tuition, housing, and meals increased by nearly 4%. Carol, that does exceed inflation.
Anybody who's sent a kid to college in the last couple of years, we've known this. And it's not just Ivy League schools. Many schools around the country are costing this month. College education, believe in it, but man, many would say we've got to have a deeper conversation about the cost of it. All right, coming up for those on TV, the close is coming your way. Tim and I continue on Bloomberg Business Week on radio, including, we're going to talk a little bit more about the eclipse, and we're going to talk a little bit about private equity.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, everybody, we are just 1 hour away from the closing bell. We're just about 25 minutes away from the total eclipse here in New York City.
I look over on your monitor, Carol, and it's literally just a NASA stream of the eclipse. She's just watching it move across.
Like master control.
I'm just kidding. It's actually the Bloomberg terminal, and
It
you're
is.
doing our show right now.
Also like master control for the business world.
Very cool.
Yeah, exactly. It's an interesting day, right? And I was just saying it's interesting to see the kind of the nation get behind one thing, kind of be all in.
In our time, just on the last hour, it's gone from Mazatlan, Mexico, all the way up through Illinois for the full immersion.
Moving pretty fast.
Yeah, the total eclipse.
Tim's like, when can I get out of the studio and go take a quick look?
We'll see if that happens. That's all I'm saying.
All right, coming up, we're going to talk about that. Our Texas bureau chief is in the path of totality. She's already seen it at this point, right?
Yeah.
So we'll see what she has to say.
Oh, yeah.
We're also going to get into, we're going to talk some business and investment stuff also. The private equity outlook, we get that from the vice chairman and head of commercial banking over at Citizens Financial Group. So see what he has to say about it when it comes to interest among his community.
Already, it's that time again, Carol. Earnings season. JP Morgan and other big banks are set to report this week. We're also going to hear from Delta Airlines. We're going to get a preview with our earnings reporter, Red Brown.
And we're also going to talk about what's up with Paramount.
Yeah, Skydance, David Ellison. If his last name sounds familiar, it's because you know it is. He, let's just say he's Silicon Valley royalty, and now we'll see what happens in Hollywood.
All right, lots to come over the next couple of hours. First up, though, a check on the trade and your top business stories. Here is Charlie Feller.
Hi, thank you very much. 59 minutes to go ahead of the closing bell with the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ 100 index. Yes, Russell 2000, all advancing right now. We're looking at a 6-point gain in the S&P, higher by 0.1%. Dow Industrials up 37, also up 0.1%. The NASDAQ Composite Index doing a little bit better, up by almost 0.2%. 10-year at 4.41% with a 2-year 4.78%. Bond yields hitting 2024 highs. Spot gold up $9 the ounce, up 0.4%. 23.39 right now on spot gold. And West Texas Intermediate crude is down 0.4%. 86.59 for a barrel of WTI. The next key moment for markets is Wednesday's consumer price numbers, projected to show further evidence of gradual cooling. Kathy Vostiansik is chief economist at Nationwide Mutual Insurance.
As long as that number isn't 4/10 or higher at the core, I think you could still have the narrative, because we have in addition to that, you have 3 inflation reports for July. The Fed meets at the end of July. I think if you get start to get 2/10 prints on months going forward, that still leaves the door open for them to cut rates in July.
Kathy Busjancic of Nationwide Mutual Insurance. Shares in some cryptocurrency-linked companies are on the rise as Bitcoin rallies to surpass the $72,000 mark, with the largest cryptocurrency extending gains for a third consecutive session. Today we got Bitcoin up almost 3.8% right now, 71,936. Among some of those other crypto names today, Coinbase Global, we've got Coinbase up now by 7.4%, and MicroStrategy is up by 5.6%. Recapping, little change for the S&P, higher now by 6. A gain there on this Eclipse Monday, up by 0.1%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Brookfield, Ares, delivered about $37 billion from cashing out private equity bets last year. That's according to Bloomberg calculations. It's a 49% drop since 2021. That, of course, was the year before the Fed began raising rates.
Indeed. The private equity industry is banking on the Fed cutting rates this year, which would spur buyers to tap debt to grease purchases and ultimately return money to limited partners. All of that, Tim, from a great piece back in February by our team here that covers private equity. So we've got a question. How are the leaders of small and mid-sized businesses thinking about private equity in this environment? It's a good question.
Don McCree is vice chairman and head of commercial banking at Citizens Financial Group. It's the Providence, Rhode Island-based publicly traded bank. They've got 1,100 branches, total assets of around $222 billion. Don joins us from Boston. Don, how are you?
Very good. Good to be with you today.
Yeah, it's good to have you with us. Okay, so just talk to us a little. You guys did this survey, but before we get to the results of that, I do want to talk a little bit about the environment right now that you're seeing with the economy, private equity notwithstanding, just general economy, what you're seeing, what you're hearing from clients, and what you can tell our listeners and our viewers.
Sure thing. I think the economy feels quite strong to us across the board. I think the jobs numbers of a couple days ago were testimony to that. We're hearing a lot of confidence within our small and mid-sized business customers, and I think it's a sharp contrast to what we were hearing just a year ago, when people were quite concerned, quite nervous about a potential recession, still kind of adjusting their businesses from a supply chain standpoint and a labor standpoint. But the tone has really changed as we've rolled into 2024.
So better, bottom line.
Much better. Much better.
All right. So talk to us in terms of your perspective, what customers, whether it's in the small area, small-sized companies, mid-sized companies, medium-sized companies, what you are seeing in terms of what they need in this environment today, and what are their requests most often?
You know, it's interesting. They're beginning to reinvest in their businesses, and that was after a couple of years of real conservatism. So people not building plants, people kind of screwing down their inventory levels and really managing their working capital more tightly. We're seeing that change at the margin, not huge yet. We're seeing a lot of activity in the refinancing area. So that's both in the bank markets and in the public bond markets. So the first quarter of the year and into the second quarter has been incredibly active in terms of high yield markets and investment grade markets. And the syndicated loan markets have had almost a 70-80% content of refinancing. And what that's saying to us is, companies are looking at their maturities, seeing liquid and open markets, and addressing those maturities aggressively as they look out over the next couple of years.
Why do you think that these small and medium-sized businesses are turning to private equity? Like, why is this the area that they want to turn to for potentially financing or for potentially to sell to? Like, what is attractive to them?
I think it's a couple issues. So we've got a very large M&A advisory business aimed at middle market companies. We have long-term relationships with those companies, know their companies quite well, and are selling anywhere from 10 to 20 of those companies every year. I'd say the vast majority is ending up with private equity, and we take advantage of a very strong private equity relationship business that we have here at Citizens. So there's a active M&A dialogue that's going on. Some of that is pent up from a long period of time where smaller companies weren't able to sell themselves because the markets weren't attractive. So a lot of these companies wanted to sell before COVID, some wanted to sell before the Great Recession. And now that liquidity is back, the company's underlying performance is improving, and the rate environment has kind of peaked from everything we can tell. There's beginning to be a lot more activity in the marketplace. The other thing that we've seen in a couple instances is private equity being, quite creative in terms of taking minority stakes or structuring equity investments into companies that may not want to sell themselves outright, but just may need some growth equity or another form of capital to help facilitate their business strategy.
How much is maybe the uptick too, or the interest, Don, at this point, because the terms are better than maybe they were 6 months ago or 12 months ago when it comes to private equity?
Terms are quite good. And, like today where we saw the 10-year back up a little bit, what we're seeing is spread tightening going on in the marketplace. So while interest rates have stayed a little stubbornly high, we see credit spreads across the board come in as liquidity has been looking for a home. Other terms and conditions have stayed relatively flat. We're not seeing a lot of loosening of covenants or things of that nature, but it's really an attractive spread environment, which is offsetting a little bit of the stubbornness of term rates.
How much dry powder is there around for you to do deals? And I bring it up because the way, as Tim started the introduction here, is we talked about, Blackstone, Apollo, Carlyle, Brookfield, Ares Management delivering about $37 billion from cashing out private equity bets last year. These are according to Bloomberg calculations. A 49% drop since 2021, the year before the Fed began raising interest rates. That's a big drop in terms of the cash out. And I'm just curious about just kind of the environment, how much dry powder is kind of out there looking for deals to do. Maybe investors aren't so interested in this because the returns aren't there. So I kind of wanted to get your view on that, kind of the flip side of it.
Yeah, my sense is there's plenty of dry powder out there. It's over $2 trillion that's on the sidelines looking to move into the market. So you have to realize that a lot of these complexes have multiple funds. So some of their older funds may be invested, and they're a little challenged for realization because equity values have stayed stubborn. Although that's changed a lot since Powell's speech in the fall, and the rise in the public equity markets is spurring some exit activity on private equity. But there's still a lot of uninvested money in newer funds that is looking to be put to work. And you saw one big transaction announced today by Blackstone, I believe, in the real estate space.
Yeah, big one. Mm-hmm.
So what happens if the Fed doesn't cut rates this year, Don?
I think at the margin, if they cut rates, it'll be a little bit better, but I don't think it's going to really impact what we're seeing. And remember, we're talking about small and mid-sized businesses. Okay. So these are valuations of $100 million up to $1 billion. They're not the $10 billion global transaction. So they're a little easier to get done. They're a little easier to get financed. So the question will be, leverage levels will probably be slightly lower if interest rates stay high, but valuations will probably adjust also. And it feels to us that buyer and seller expectations are beginning to come together in a more aggressive way.
I am also curious, Don, for you guys at Citizens, I mean, how much is private equity and or private credit becoming kind of an important aspect and something you want to be able to offer to your customers?
We're not in either of the businesses. We look at the private equity and private credit complexes as both competitors and customers. We have very big relationships, and we often will underwrite and distribute some of our syndicated lending activity into the private credit funds. So they're buyers of some of the risks that we originate. We have great partnerships with a lot of them. We haven't set up a formal partnership the way some of our competitors have, but it's not really stopping us from engaging in interesting business. And on the private equity side, it's a huge part of our business. We've been active with the private equity firms for the last, since we went public about 9 years ago.
But on the private credit side, do you want to guys get more involved? I mean, it feels like it's been the only thing anybody in the financial industry wants to talk about pretty aggressively in the last couple of years.
We won't do it on our balance sheet, I don't believe, because we have no plans to. And it's largely because the leverage levels tend to be higher than we're comfortable with.
Got it.
So we'll do it in partnership with some of our good relationships there.
How does it compare to other periods of time where you've been doing this? I mean, we talk about a lot. The high interest rate environment right now is one that hasn't been seen, at least from the Fed side, in decades at this point. What has that effect been on the clients that you serve from a private equity perspective?
I think deal activity has been relatively slow over the last couple of years, as you rightly point out. Realizations have been slow, and there's been a value gap between buyers and sellers of companies. So that's been the primary problem. Is you have to have the buyers lower their expectations in terms of price, and the sellers, might have to pay a little bit more than they think. But deals are beginning to form, and we've seen a real uptick in activity across the private equity clients that we have over the last, literally since the beginning of 2024.
Do you work with clients who would also consider going public, or are these companies not necessarily that profile?
No, we have an equity platform that we bought a few years ago, mainly focused on tech and biotech and financial technology, but also other industries. We were on the Reddit IPO, for example, as a book manager. Mm-hmm. So we're beginning to see the public market activity tick up slightly. It's still easier to get a deal done in the private market from my standpoint right now.
That's what I was wondering, yeah.
I am interested too, though, in private equity in general, since you guys have seen so many different cycles or seen a fair amount of cycles, Don. In terms of the types of deals, is it industry specific? We talk a lot about AI. We're also, looking at the biotech area. There's been a lot of activity in terms of deal activity going on there. Is there any specific verticals or industries where you're seeing a lot of interest or looking to do some kind of deal on the private equity front?
Not AI, but certainly in data centers, we're seeing quite a bit, and we have a pretty big data center advisory business. We've seen a lot in healthcare, including biotech, and then just good old-fashioned manufacturing companies that are performing from a solid cash flow standpoint. We see a lot of activity there, and in the sector we're talking about, which is the medium-sized business, they tend to be family-owned businesses, and the driver really around activity is the next generation doesn't want to be involved in the company, so they're looking to realize from a trust and estate standpoint.
So like a liquidity event, right? And they just want to get out of it.
Yep.
And basically.
Exactly.
Hey, how do you guys think about? It's interesting. We've talked a lot about the Jamie Dimon shareholder letter, and in it he covers a lot of big things like AI and also geopolitics. But I do think about something like the elections come November. Are you concerned about the outcome and how it might impact, especially when it comes to your private equity aspect, or even financially, or for banking, regulatory? Is there things that are top of mind for you?
I think, I'm a little more concerned about the volatility that could be in the markets before the election, depending on different statements or different positions that some of the candidates could take. Hard to predict what that's going to be, but I think history has said that the markets usually can kind of move on once the results of an election happen. And I think it's interesting that, both of the candidates, it appears, are pretty well-known entities. So they both will have been prior presidents. So I think the market will be able to handicap pretty much what they're going to get, regardless of who the winner is going to be. I think, we'll see what happens in terms of, geopolitical stances if Mr. Trump becomes the president again, and probably the regulatory environment feels like it's a little bit more challenged under a Democratic president, the way it's been for the last couple of years, as mergers and acquisitions have a little bit of a difficult time moving through the system.
Is that the general consensus that you hear when you speak to, does this come up with your clients? Is this something that you're talking about right now?
They're really not that worried about it. It's a long way away. I think they're much more focused on the core functioning of their businesses and making sure that they actually can perform and are prepared for whatever gets thrown at them. So there's not a lot of obsession among our clients around election outcome. There's not a lot of obsession around geopolitical events. Obviously, if something goes awry in the Mideast and oil prices spike, that'll affect some of the customers we deal with, but they're much more focused on the nuts and bolts of running their businesses right now.
All right. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask. Any obsession for you over the eclipse?
No, I was wondering if it was going to get dark in here in the middle of our conversation, but I think we're 15 minutes away. Got a nice sunny day in Boston.
Yeah, I think it's over Cleveland right now. So we're just kind of keeping a watch on it. Listen, you do keep a watch on so much, and it really gives us a great snapshot for our listeners and viewers in terms of what's going on. So appreciate it. Don McCree joining us, Vice Chairman and Head of Commercial Banking over at Citizens Financial Group, joining us from Boston.
Hey, taking a look at the markets right now, we are seeing the S&P 500 higher by about 0.1%. The NASDAQ Composite higher by a little more than that. The Dow up just shy of 0.1%.
Got my NASA live feed up.
Yeah, how's it looking?
Cleveland, full.
Total eclipse of the sun?
Total eclipse of the sun.
Okay.
You got to sing it if you're going to do
it.
it.
All right, not a chance.
All right, everybody. You are listening and watching Bloomberg Business Week on this Monday, April 8th. Going out with a little B-52s for you. This is Bloomberg.
It's 3:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Stocks continue to hold on to gains with the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ all up by just about 0.1%. S&P higher now by 5 points at 52.09. The Dow up 35, a gain of 0.1%, while the NASDAQ Composite Index is up 20 right now, up by about 0.1%. We've got the 10-year yielding 4.41% with a 2-year at 4.78%. 0.1%. Spot gold up $10 the ounce to $23.39, up 0.4%. And West Texas Intermediate crude oil is down 30 cents, down by about 0.3%, 86.61 a barrel. Bottom line update for the Dow, the S&P, and Nasdaq. As for the equity market backdrop, Katerina Simonetti is Senior Portfolio Manager at Morgan Stanley.
You know, S&P 500 is up almost 10% for the year, and this is after being up 24% in the previous year. So investors are getting concerned, rightfully so, given the geopolitical environment, given the, you know, the charged political environment here in the U.S. So they absolutely should take advantage of the higher yield if they want to take some of that risk off the table.
Oil is retreating from a 5-month high after Israel said it would remove some troops from Gaza. Crude has been rallying on escalating geopolitical tensions and supply shocks. Today, West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.3%. Among oil majors, shares of ExxonMobil, they're a little changed, up 4 cents. ADRs of BP up by 1% right now. Chevron shares, they're up by about 0.1%. Recapping stocks higher. Eclipse Monday. It's dark in the New York area. S&P up 4, up 0.1%. And that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Carol Massar along with Tim Stanovic. It is Eclipse Day. You know that. And it's interesting. I'm looking outside our Bloomberg windows here. Lots of glass in our offices, and it's getting pretty dark out here. Reminds me of kind of an afternoon in the winter. So it's definitely coming our way. Tim Stanovic, I'm just going to say, he headed up, I believe, to another floor to kind of check it out as well. People throughout Texas, Arkansas, Illinois, and Ohio have already experienced it. And as I said, right about now, it is moving here in the New York area and headed to Buffalo, New York. If the weather's good, it will, in particular, experience a total solar eclipse, the moon completely obscuring the view of the sun up there in Buffalo. So a lot may happen. Julie Fine is Bloomberg News Texas Bureau Chief. She's been following it all day, joining us from Dallas, our Dallas Bureau. Julie, we have been following it, the live feed off of NASA. Dallas, tell us about what it looked like from your perspective earlier today.
I mean, it was almost pitch black here. It's interesting because it was a cloudy day and there were questions on how dark it would get. It got really, really dark. We actually went down to the park near our offices, and overall, the mayor guessed that there was about, or estimated, about 400,000 people came to the Dallas area, so it was definitely really packed down there. I would say it started to get dark within about 45 minutes before we hit totality, and then it really covered, and it was really dark for about 5 minutes, and then it was like light again. It just went back to the regular day. So it's a really interesting phenomenon to be able to see in the amount of people that came into the city. I mean, you think about a Super Bowl, okay, that's 100,000 people in a stadium. That doesn't equal 400,000 people. So in the city of Dallas alone, it's been very crowded all weekend, but it was certainly a sight to see.
Yeah, it's been a sight to see, too, to see so many Americans, right, throughout, across the country, as it moved across certain parts of the country. It feels like come together for one thing, so it's pretty cool. I should say right now it's over Tupper Lake, which is an area in the Adirondacks. I've been up in there. It's gorgeous, and it looks like we're getting the total eclipse there. Is this your first one? I'm just curious about, for you to be seeing it, what it was like.
I saw a partial eclipse here in 2017, but this was my first to hit totality. I mean, it got pretty dark in 2017, but this was my first one to see totality. Very interesting today because here I am in Dallas, Texas, and it's on its way to Buffalo, New York. That's where I'm from originally, so I've got all kinds of friends and family getting ready for it there, and I can tell them this is what it's like right now. So it's definitely very interesting. I have to tell you, it's been really good for this city and basically any city where it goes through.
Yeah, I mean, that's the interesting. I mean, we have a great story about the impact on New York in particular, which has been hit so hard by the loss of its industrial base. I mean, this has really been a big boon, whether it's hotels, whether it's restaurants, you name it, everybody's been chiming in here.
Absolutely. And to get a flight into here or to get a flight into any of those areas, so expensive, but people are going out, they're eating. It was interesting here. You almost get the feeling of like a tailgate for a football game. People on the street corner with the glasses, selling food. We had food trucks all over the place. So you definitely could feel the financial aspect of it. And it was, there's so many times where you're here reporting on difficult financial news or difficult national news. This one's just been a nice one to be involved with, to be able to see how many people got out there and really enjoyed it.
The news has been heavy, and this one feels like what we all needed, certainly as a country. Julie, thank you so much. Julie Fine, Bloomberg News Texas Bureau Chief, on the latest of the eclipse. And, of course, my partner in crime here, Tim Stanovic, not in the studio because he went to check out the eclipse. Tim's joining us on Zoom. So tell us about it. There you are.
I got the glasses on. I'm doing this safely. It's pretty cool. I mean, it's definitely cooler out here than it usually is. It's darker out here. It doesn't feel like it's, in the middle of the 3 o'clock hour right now. A lot of people, I don't know if you can see behind me, but a lot of people have gathered. There were more here earlier when they were kind of watching it get the moon get right in front of the sun. But it feels like one of those moments where, New Yorkers come together to do something in common. And there are, like Julie was saying, these are few and far between right now. And it kind of feels like everyone's on the same page down here, Carol.
I got to say, Tim, you've been so excited leading up to it. You have a young son, and I know you've been excited for him as well, collecting glasses. I mean, as a city, and it feels like anybody along the path, we were just talking with Julie Fine, anyone along the path of this has been all in and, lining up places for people to watch and so on and so forth. I mean, it's really been interesting to watch here.
Yeah, so a lot of attention has been paid to the so-called path of fatality where Julie is and where, so many Americans have gone right now. But it doesn't mean that people who are, hundreds of miles away from that path of fatality can't actually experience something that's pretty darn cool, I got to say. So even if you are, to the northeast of us right now and you could still get a chance to go and check it out, I highly encourage you to do, even if you're not in the path of fatality, because, hey, it's a solar eclipse. This stuff doesn't happen, every few months.
All right. Did you actually see, though? It was partial, I'm assuming, or what did you actually see?
Yeah, I actually saw it. So these glasses, I got these from the local library here in New York City. They were giving them out in the days leading up to this. And I actually got to see what it kind of looks like, what the moon would look like when the moon is a crescent moon. The glasses give it like an orange tint. And that's really the best way to describe it. It was actually hard to find a space down here where I could see it. I had to kind of run around with Justin, my trusty cameraman right now, who's holding up the phone, to find a space where we could actually see it between buildings. So that was the issue, is just making sure that you could see it between buildings. After all, it is Manhattan.
To be fair, it's a nice day here in New York City, and I'm looking at you. I'm also looking behind you. You know where we sit. It's an all-glass studio. We have a bunch of glass behind us, and it reminds me of, those winter afternoons, like when it's like 3:30 and you and I are sitting in here and we're like, oh my God, that's what it looks like in here.
Well, that's exactly what it feels like. And scientists have said that this confuses, especially in the path of fatality, confuses animals. So dogs and other animals, birds especially, that will experience darkness at a time that they normally would experience in daytime. So it kind of confuses the animal senses.
All right. So what are you going to ask your son when you go home?
I'm going to ask if he made sure to stay inside during this, because you can't trust a 5-year-old to keep glasses on. And we'll watch replays on YouTube. That's what we'll do.
All right. Listen, we're going to give you some time to get back here in the studio, but so glad you could be out there and see it. So really good stuff.
And hey, thank you for holding down the fort. I appreciate that.
Anything for you. You know that. All right. Tim Stanovic, of course, my co-host. He's going to come back in a little bit, but getting a chance to see this. And, we talked with our Julie Fine, who was there, obviously, in Texas and got to see that earlier. But we talked a little bit about New York and New York State in particular. And I'm looking at it right now, watching the NASA live feed, and it's now over Maine, if you will. But we talked about, for a place like upstate New York, it really has had some really tough economic times. And we talked specifically about the loss of its industrial base. The manufacturing sector in New York shrank by more than 60% between the 1940s and 2009. So pretty much cut in half, if you will. That was a report by the state comptroller. But as a result of the eclipse and the totality that you could see up in the Buffalo, New York area, Buffalo being one of the biggest beneficiaries of the eclipse, the state's second biggest city is anticipating as many as 1 million visitors. So we'll wait for some numbers maybe later on today or tomorrow to see whether or not that happened. And that's the same as the entire population of Erie County. So many people coming into the region. The stories leading up to this, whether it's the hotel sites, more than half of U.S. cities along the eclipse's path
path are fully booked or were fully booked for the night of April 7th. That's according to data from AirDNA. It's a data analytics company with thousands of Airbnbs in the path of totality slated to reach 100% occupancy. That in the Adirondacks and North Country. So there was a lot going on. We know about the traffic stories, but I got to say, just watching this live feed, and we've got it up for you guys who are watching on YouTube and also on our Bloomberg Original streaming service, pretty cool to see, and it's still kind of dark a little bit outside. All right, everybody. You're listening and watching Bloomberg Business Week. We've got just under a half an hour to go until we wrap up the trading day on this Eclipse Monday. Little movements in terms of the equity trade, just up about 7 points on the S&P 500, 52 points higher on the Dow Jones Industrial Average, and the NASDAQ 100. We're looking for a gain of right now just about 18 points here. So seeing some movement, but a slight movement. We do have some important inflation prints this week. We also get the FOMC minutes from the last Fed meeting. What's of real interest is what's going on along the U.S. Treasury curve. Right now, that 10-year note, we're looking at a yield of 4.41, so watching very closely to see if it hits that 4.5 mark. Once again, 2-year note with a yield of 4.78. So again, seeing yields tick a bit higher as people are rethinking how many rate cuts we might get here in 2024. They continue to be reduced. All right, somebody else who also saw the eclipse, our own Amy Morris. Let's get a check on world and national news, heading back to D.C. Hey, Amy.
Hi, Carol. I have pictures for you. Good. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is also vowing to carry out the Rafah invasion, declaring, quote, there is a date. State Department spokesman Matt Miller has an update on getting aid into Gaza.
Yesterday, 304 aid trucks entered Gaza, the highest number of trucks in any single day since the conflict began. That number represents a significant improvement, but it is important not just that we see the daily number continue to grow, but that it be sustained over time. Our hope is that by later this week, 350 trucks will enter Gaza each day.
Netanyahu also says that they are still working to secure the release of the hostages. The sticker price of an Ivy League education edging closer now to 6 figures per year. Bloomberg's Nathan Hager brings us that story from Washington.
5 of the 8 Ivy League schools now charge more than $90,000 a year before financial aid. The University of Pennsylvania tops the list at $92,288 for tuition, fees, housing, and other expenses. Cornell comes next, followed by Brown, Dartmouth, and Yale, all above the $90,000 mark. The least expensive Ivy is actually Harvard at just shy of $83,000 per year. Families under certain income thresholds do receive full rides to Ivy League schools if they're admitted. In Washington, I'm Nathan Hager, Bloomberg Radio.
Along those lines, President Biden released details of a new plan to ease student loan debt for more than 30 million borrowers after the Supreme Court struck down his first plan last year.
Our administration will propose a new rule to cancel up to $20,000 in runaway interest for any borrower that owes more now than when they started paying the loan.
The measures would apply to borrowers who meet certain criteria, including those who qualify for federal programs but have not yet been enrolled. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg.
It's 3:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long. At Bloomberg, we have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, little changed, holding on to gains. Let us head right over to the first word breaking news desk for today's afternoon call. Here he is. Welcome back, Bill Maloney.
And good afternoon, Shai. That's right. U.S. stocks are quiet right now, with the Dow currently up 24 points. S&Ps are higher by 4, and NASDAQ rises by 28. The U.S. 10-year yield at 4.42%. Gold is up 9. Oil still in the red, but Bitcoin is higher by 3.6%. Among the main 11 S&P sectors, leaders were consumer discretionary and real estate, healthcare, and tech led to the downside, and leaders to the upside in the Dow, Nike and Home Depot, while Intel and Merck were under pressure. In deal news, Blackstone to purchase Apartment Income REIT in a $10 billion deal. Schumer said the Capital One Discover merger is a concern. And wrapping things up, Tesla rose after Musk said he'll unveil a robo-taxi in August. Live from the first breaking news desk, I'm Bill Maloney. Charlie?
Okay, we thank you very much, Bill Maloney, and to hear live breaking news over your Bloomberg-type squawk, SQUA, on your Bloomberg terminal. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
I'm driving in my car. I turn on the radio.
How about you let me drive?
Oh, no. Who's gonna drive you home? Honey, please, I'll do the driving. Drive on.
Excuse me, I want to drive.
It's
the question that drives us.
This is the Drive to the Close
That funky music will drive us till the dawn.
on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, everybody, just about 18 minutes left in today's trading session, getting ready to wrap up the Monday trade, the Eclipse trade. Totality.
Yeah, thing moved quickly.
It did, didn't it?
It moved quickly, yeah.
Was it fun?
Yeah, it was cool. But I mean, just to see it go from Mazatlan, Mexico, during the 2 o'clock hour, all the way to Maine right now.
It's pretty quick.
Yeah.
It was amazing.
Some would say it's science.
It's amazing how these things move. Well, did you ever
works.
get up? I have gotten up many times to see a sunrise, and it's like dark, 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 and then all of a sudden it breaks, and
Yeah.
it's like up, and it's really quick.
What a world we live in.
It's pretty cool.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, it's actually Planet Earth. Kind of love you. All right. Also, really, really like our next guest, our Drive to the Close guest. Back with us is Carol Schleif. She's Chief Investment Officer at BMO Family Office, joining us from Chicago, where I believe you did see the eclipse. How are you?
I did. It was great. I flew in last night and realized I was going to see a lot more eclipse here in Chicago than I would have seen in Minneapolis today. So it was fun. And they handed out glasses this morning, so we all got a peek at it.
Was it your first one?
Yeah, it was. It was. We see a lot of northern lights up there, though, so I have that advantage all summer long.
That is actually a really sweet thing. Very, very cool. So, speaking about seeing things, what are you seeing when you look at? Sorry,
It was a good segue. It was a good segue.
Nice segue.
So, what do you see when you look at today's market environment? Not just Monday, but just really, I feel like, Carol, the rethink once again in terms of the narrative around what the Fed might do this year.
Well, I think it's not only that rethink, but I think this week in particular, people don't want to get in front of the CPI, PPI, or bank earnings. It's a very interest rate sensitive week. And so you could see some volatility later in the week. But we were never in the camp expecting 6 to 7 cuts like the market got ahead of itself, we think, late last year. We had, in our annual update, we wrote 2, maybe 3, cuts as our base case. And now thinking that it really doesn't matter realistically for the intermediate and longer term how many cuts we get this year. It's directionally where we're going. And the important thing is the reason we don't see the Fed anxious to start cutting is because the economy is in great shape.
So if we get no rate cuts, who cares? Because the economy is in great shape. Is it that simple?
Yeah, I wouldn't say who cares. You'll probably get some volatility if you get no cuts this year. But if you get a cut or two pushed towards the end of the year, and if you have some visibility on there, and we also have a very big election that comes between here and the end of the year, so there'll be a lot of issue over that. But I think the important thing is this secular trend we've got going on and you've had a lot of guests on in the last couple of weeks in particular talking about how important that secular trend of the infrastructure rebuild that we're doing here, the rebuild, the build out, news this morning with funding for TSMC and news out a couple weeks ago for funding for Intel. That stuff, 75% of it isn't even out the door yet. So we've got a lot of build, intermediate and longer term, to focus on keeping this economy pretty healthy.
I feel like that was something that was kind of, I agree with you, that people were, some of our guests were coming on, was it late last year or early this year, just reminding us that, all right, everybody, I know you're a little nervous about maybe, this market rally, but that there's still a lot of spend going on in the economy because of some of the federal government programs, especially when it comes to infrastructure. And as you say, they're not all out that door. That money's going to go somewhere, and that goes somewhere, it means it goes into the economy, right?
Well, and I definitely right there. And I think the other thing to watch as we're in earnings season is look at the big tech companies and look at how much they're spending on a quarterly basis for infrastructure build up for data centers.
Yeah.
And we can't even hook all those data centers to the grid. So we've got to get accelerated on that green grid, or not just green grid, but on the transition grid or existing grid. We've got infrastructure here. We've got major gas pipes and electricity pipes that were put in the late 1800s, early 1900s. We've got a lot of serious infrastructure rebuild we need to do. You've got the Key Bridge and the focus on that infrastructure. We had our very own bridge in Minnesota go down a decade and a half ago. And the thing that amazed me is they got it put back up in a year and a half.
Yeah.
And so I think that's one of the things that's really amazing. But you marshal those national and local resources, and that's what's got to happen in a lot of this industrial spend.
Well, I get that there is the political will to do that for one-off projects and for tragedies like that one and for the most recent one that you talk about, Carol. But I'm wondering if there's, if there is the political will to actually do this on a nationwide basis, because, well, you have a lot of competing factions. So it's not like
right.
Lawmakers are necessarily going to fight for other states to get funding.
Yeah, and that it's a very valid point. It's difficult to get things permitted here. It's one of the reasons why we've seen the delay in the buildup, because the CHIPS Act, I think, was passed in 21 or 22, so it's a couple of years out there. So getting the money out the door is difficult, because then you got to get it permitted. You've got to go through environmental review. You've got, and that's one of the things that Congress has talked about trying to address too, is can we get this stuff permitted more quickly? In certain downtowns where they're trying to permit higher density housing, they're getting pushed back. So there is a lot of that going on, but the will is there. And if we don't want to continue to use ChatGPT, we've got to be able to hook that processing power to the grid somehow.
How much do you use ChatGPT? I wonder.
I actually am a late adopter on that. But the interesting thing is I think looking at the number of places that artificial intelligence is already being used. I had a scan done last week, and when I got notice within 12 hours that it had been read, you could tell from the doctor's note initially that they had used artificial intelligence to do that initial screening.
To actually screen the image, or to do the write-up?
To screen the image.
Okay, wow.
And then, yeah. And so, a use case is you look at a lot of those routine screens that people have, and to feed them through artificial intelligence, where they can say to the radiologist, oh, these are the 15 that look like they might have something going on. Your view needs these 15 first. So use cases all the way through the system in terms of already there, because artificial intelligence, companies have been building use cases for a decade. It's just a generative AI that we're all getting access to now.
Right. It takes it to a whole other level, right, in terms of the information it can use. How is that just 30 seconds? It's just going through that personal experience and seeing that and realizing, wait a minute, okay, this stuff is not just something we continue to talk about, but people are not only made the investment, but they're actually putting it to use. Is it shaping your investment thesis or think? And just got about 30 seconds. Yeah.
I think it does all the way through, because our research team definitely uses some of the various things, and they're pulling out for us how the companies that they cover are building use cases. And in some cases in the energy industry, for example, one of the companies couldn't lure enough AI engineers through, so they sent their own engineers to MIT for 200 of them to build their own.
Well, Jamie Dimon likens AI's transformational impact to the steam engine and the impact it had on our economy. So everybody's all over it. Carol, great to catch up with you. Carol Schleif, she's Chief Investment Officer at BMO Family Office, joining us on this Eclipse Monday from Chicago. This is Bloomberg.
My general advice is continue to seek out companies or people that are maybe one stage or two stages ahead of you. And I think this is generalizable to not just to startups, but anyone seeking fast growth in their own professional lives, in their careers too. What does greatness look like? Try to seek out people who've been there, done that before, and then try to not connect with one, but try to interview 3, 5, 10 people to see what is a general pattern of greatness that look like that will get you to the next level of the company, next stage, maybe a year, 12 months from now, 24 months from now. Seek out people who kind of went down the path a few times. Then you'll start to find this pattern that start to emerge. What are things that you need to have 12 months from now, 24 months from now that you currently don't have? Then try to build a path towards that. It's almost like Amazon's or Jeff Bezos' mantra of working backwards. Think about what your end game or next stage look like, and then figure out your steps to getting there, and who do you need to work with, upgrading or coaching your existing team or recruiting from somewhere else to really level your leadership. Because ultimately, the job of a CEO is to do 3 things, right? One is get the strategy right for your company, making sure it's executed, get the right teams onboarded, getting the resources, whether it be fundraising or allocating your resources. So it's strategy, people, or team, figuring out how you need to navigate those things to get to the next level.
When I was younger, I used to be in bands. I'd play drums in bands and toured America with them, did a lot of session drumming, recorded albums. So yeah, it was good fun doing the drumming. The only reason I stopped it, well, I still play, but not as serious as I did when I was younger, but drumming doesn't pay the bills. I was never good enough to be able to pay the bills with it, but it was good fun. I started RJF, and the reason I started it was I saw a gap in the market for particular early stage and startup businesses. With the experience that I've got of running businesses, of being a finance director at the very biggest companies in the world to being finance director of small startups, we were looking at providing more than just basic accountancy services. So yes, we'll do all that, we'll do all the basic, all the statutory side of things that you need to do. But there's so much more value that we can add, and I wanted to have my experience to help these startups because a lot of them don't really know where to go. You can go to your high street accountants and they can do a good job compliance-wise, but you would question whether they've actually been in the firing line of a business. Have you been in a business where you're thinking, how do I pay wages next week? Or business is really successful, what do we do with it next? Or how do we grow it? How do we grow into international territories? Or how do we grow our markets? How do we expand? So a lot of the experience I've seen over the years and seen different types of business in different sectors, I thought, well, it's a real value that I can add to these businesses as opposed to just being an FD, because a lot of these businesses can't afford an FD. But if we can take care of their statutory side of things, the compliance side of things, I'm on hand to be able to help and advise businesses with their growth strategy, or if they're in difficulty, help them through these times.
domestic market. Charlie?
And that's Dan Schwartzman reporting right now. Shares of Spirit Airlines uses the ticker SAV up by 7.1%. JetBlue, part of the merger that didn't happen, JetBlue up by 3.5%. Those are our top company stories, and this is Bloomberg.
You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Messer and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
All right, everybody, just under 5 minutes left in today's trading session, getting ready to wrap up the Monday trade. Having said that, we want to just dig a little bit deeper into a story Charlie mentioned. It's something that we have been following since it began trading after it's, it tied up with its blank check firm. We're talking about Digital World acquisition. We're talking about Donald Trump's media company.
Yeah, down right now about 9%. It's wiped out some $2.8 billion as of midday today, as some of the retail traders who frantically bid up the stock last month began to sell. Carol, it's down 37% from its close on March 26th, but it's down 44% from all-time highs.
Yeah, kind of interesting. I mean, if you remember when it came out of the gate, I mean, the first day it was up 35%. The day after that, it was up 16%. Then it was up, I'm just looking here, up about 14%. But it's the first time that we're seeing, I guess, in several days, right, since it began trading, that we're really seeing the stock under pressure because it was up, what, 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, it was down a little bit last week.
It was up 3 days in a row.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think I think the thing that we have to remember.
You're right. It was actually last week. It got slammed.
Yeah. I think the thing that we have to remember.
That first week, it was like doing really well.
Yeah. And it's like Bailey said when he was on our program talking about this. It's completely detached from reality in terms of fundamentals. I mean, this is a company that generated just $4.1 million in revenue last year. So, and it's a very expensive company to short, a risky company to short. Bailey writes. So. Yeah, interesting one to watch ahead of the election, certainly.
No, I mean, that's a good point. And that's something that we tried to get into when it first came out is really what is the business? What's the revenue line? Looking at that kind of thing that we normally talk about.
The normal things
any
that
entity. Right, exactly.
The things that usually lead into the stock price of a company, like, future free cash flow.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then what it would mean for the wealth of Donald Trump, right? Pursuing the White House for the second time. But for him to benefit from that wealth, he'll have to wait 6 months before he can sell shares under that lockup agreement, unless they make a change.
Well, the wealth on paper that he has accumulated as a result of this has dropped about $1.6 billion to roughly $2.9 billion.
Yeah, that's a haircut, as they would say. All right, everybody. Interesting story. Certainly one name that we continue to track here, but head to Bloomberg.com if you want to hear more. Right now, though, we're going to head over to our TV colleagues, check in on the trade. Because we've got kind of stocks down across the board just a little bit, but it's really the rate curve, the U.S. Treasury curve, that's really been of interest. Stick around right now. Beyond the Bell starts right now.
Beyond the Bell, Bloomberg's comprehensive cross-platform coverage of the U.S. market close starts right now.
And right now, we are 2 minutes away from the end of the trading day. Romaine Bostick alongside Alex Steele. We're counting you down to the closing bell. You're here to help take us beyond the bell. It's a global simulcast. We're joined right now by Scarlett Fu in our television studio, Carol Masser and Tim Stenevec in the radio booth. Welcome to our audiences across all of our Bloomberg platforms here on this very special day, Carol Masser, which, as you know, is National Empanada Day.
Really? Not where I thought you were going to go.
Yeah. I mean, I knew he wasn't going to go to the eclipse, but...
How about the other E? Yeah, exactly.
Roman.
Tim actually ran out of the studio to go check it out.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it was part of work. It was part of work. I did a hit from down there on Lexington Avenue and 58th Street.
Yeah.
Did you really?
Yeah, I did. It was great.
Using a phone.
Using the phone.
And
Zoom. It's this new thing.
I feel like we missed a trick there, Romaine.
Yeah.
I feel like we should have done that.
Yeah, look at that. That's initiative.
Next time. 20 years. We'll make that happen in the next 20 years.
20 years,
sitting here.
2044.
I'll take my walker out there.
I'm having trouble keeping my eyes open because I looked, I think, outside too long with the glasses on.
What?
And now,
On or
with
off?
the glasses on.
Okay.
Right. But now I feel like everything's a little too bright, a little bit too, weird, and it's probably just my mind playing tricks on me.
Here,
But
I have some eye drops there. I was using some too, so I just gave her some eye drops.
Scar?
yeah, just hanging on.
But I don't know if you guys looked at the volume. I mean, it was just kind of sad. Clearly,
Everybody was
no one was
watching the
trading. They were
eclipse.
all watching the stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we were talking to Abigail a little earlier, and she was providing a lot of anecdotes anecdotes. Yeah, nobody's around. I feel like everybody's off work today, or at least chose to take off work. Or if you're like Tim, you just go wandering the streets of Manhattan.
I checked with my boss. He said it was okay. Yeah.
It was approved. It was approved.
All right. Well, the price action might have been tepid, but we always have to walk you through. Look, even the clapping is kind of tepid. Right?
There's like 4 people there.
Yeah, they're all like, why are we here?
Inside.
We missed the eclipse for this. Nevertheless, I'm sure they're all happy to be there. Ringing the bell here on this Monday afternoon. I'm not sure all the folks on the left there are, but interesting price action in the market today with the Dow Jones Industrial Average. We're just going to call it unchanged. It is in the red, down about 11 points. That's only a fraction of a percent. The S&P also down only about 2 points on the day. The NASDAQ higher by 5 points on the day. If you haven't fallen asleep yet,
God.
Here's some action for you. The Russell 2000, a 0.5% gain on the day. There you go.
Yeah, this is a bit of a snoozer.
I'll see you
that's
guys
for sure.
Wednesday. How about that?
Deal. Well done.
Hey, that's for our dozens of viewers out there right now. That chose to stick with us.
People care. Thank you for sticking along. All right, the S&P 500. So what does it mean? 286 names gaining in this Monday mellow session. 215 scarlet to the downside, 2 unchanged.
Yeah, and when you look at the sector breakdown, 6 groups in the red. 5 groups in the green, but 2 groups little change. That's communication services and materials. Your best performers are REITs, consumer discretionary, thanks to Tesla, and utilities. The laggards here are energy, healthcare, and tech.
No eclipse in the IMAP, huh?
No, it's kind of messy.
All right, let's get to some of the individual gainers. Tesla, number 1 gainer in the NASDAQ 100, number 4 gainer in the S&P 500. Elon Musk promising again that a robo-taxi is coming, this time in August. Investors jumping on board the name. The stock finishing off its highs of the session, but still just shy of a 5% gain in today's session. Keep in mind, Elon Musk has been talking about one for years, and it's coming at a time where we know Tesla shares are one of the worst performing names in the S&P 500, down about 30% here. And so just kind of interesting to see investors kind of like it and jumping on board in this kind of mellow day and mellow session, low volume session. GE Vernova, this was your number 2 gainer in the S&P 500, and this one was up just about 6% in today's session, catching its first upgrade quickly from the Wall Street community. JP Morgan analyst Mark Strauss upgrading shares of the power generation company to the equivalent of buy from hold, kept a $141 a share price target. GE Vernova closing at just under $130 a share in today's session. You might remember Vernova and GE Aerospace completed their separation. That was on April 2nd, with GE Vernova having a very volatile first week of trading, but nonetheless, investors liking that upgrade. And
why didn't they just call it Vernova?
I agree.
Confusing, this GE.
Don't you think they're going to drop it at one point?
I mean, they have to, because every time you start talking, I think you're talking about GE.
I know. I'm trying. I know. All right.
It's not your fault.
No to the what is it? The consultancies, right? The consultant community, right? Who are like, keep the GE thing. All right, let's get to apartment income REIT. We had to do this one. This one was up 22%. Had to do after Blackstone agreed to buy it. It's an apartment buildings owner, $5.5 billion market cap, at least as of today. They bought it for $39.12 a share, so the stock closing at $38.38. So a little bit of deal flow on this Monday.
All right, how about some of the decliners, starting with the worst performer on a percentage basis in the S&P 500? That goes to Paramount Global. We're continuing to watch what's going on with Paramount and Skydance. We're actually going to have Lucas Shaw join us in just a few minutes to explain the latest there, but down 7.6% today. Matrix Asset Advisors has raised concerns over a proposal that would see Paramount Global sell its voting stock and then merge with David Ellison's production company, Skydance Media. Also, keep an eye on shares of Uber, which ended up closing lower today by 2.76%. You heard Carol talk about Elon Musk's robo-taxi, which is going to be unveiled in August. The company has said that the platform will be a cheaper car, robo-taxi. Kind of makes sense that a company like Uber potentially would fall on a day like today. The concern, I guess, is that if there are robo-taxis available at your beck and call, you won't necessarily call Uber. We should note that Uber did have a self-driving division, the Advanced Technologies Group, ATG. They sold that back in 2020, but they've invested in the company that they sold it to, so they still have a stake when it comes to self-driving. And then DJT, Trump Media and Technology Group. Do you want to look at this one? Closing today down by, about, is that 5% or 8%, guys? Maybe I was looking at the eclipse too long. Thank you.
8.5%.
Yeah, 8.4%.
It's kind of hard from here. It's far.
We're going to switch studios at some point. It's wiped out several $billion in value just in the last few days. We have seen the market cap decline to roughly about $5 billion now, even though it generates just $4.1 million dollars in revenue last year. So we're starting to see the stock come back to earth. We should note that it's still, I think it's fair to say that analysts would argue that it's still not necessarily connected to any fundamentals right now.
Yeah, potentially. You're not alone. I couldn't read the location indicator for any of the Eclipse stuff, so you're totally in good company.
Thank you,
okay,
Alex.
the bond market was actually kind of interesting. You definitely had a sell-off. Bonds on offer in the front end, pretty solidly. Yields up by about 4 basis points. You also had a similar sell-off in the back end, but that reversed kind of middle of the day. A touch of buying coming in. But I do think the converssion of does the 10-year hit 5 before 3 is a legit one and not one that we would have had, say, just even a few weeks ago.
Yeah, I mean, definitely so. I mean, everyone's saying that 4 or 5 in the line. It was interesting. We were speaking with, who was it? Michael Pond a little bit earlier at Barclays, and he actually sees this bond sell-off continuing, and a couple other folks, Carol, that we've spoken to today, also saying the same thing here. This is just the start.
Well, listen, and this is where the CPI, the PPI prints this week, but CPI in particular on Wednesday, you know, whether or not we see a hotter than expected or forecasted inflation print, whether or not then they kind of, you know, we get to that 4.5 on that 10-year once again. So kind of keeping an eye on all of that. Having said that, both you and we all have stories about things going up in price. And this one that we caught our attention, Tim and my attention, has to do with Stony Brook's Eastern Long Island Hospital. The chief administrative officer says it's kind of a challenging place to recruit because it's gotten so expensive to live. And they're talking about Greenport in Long Island, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. In Long Island. It's about
it just came out naturally.
It's the New Jersey in me that came out. Anyway, the median prices in the once affordable area now have jumped in 4 years 50% to almost $1 million. So, and listings have declined about 60%. So they're seeing some pressure in trying to attract doctors who make $350,000 or more. They can't even find a home.
I mean, I think an important note in this story is that the governor did try to actually build, you know, make a rule change so more housing could be built in New York City suburbs to try to alleviate the housing crisis, of which this article certainly is part of. But the folks who live in these areas were not fans of that change in zoning, that change in plan. So I would argue that until we see more homes built in a lot of these areas, the prices are going to keep going high because of supply and demand.
Yeah, so Suffolk County, Nassau County, Westchester County are saying, nope, not in my backyard. We don't want any more houses because that's going to affect our school district. That's going to affect our the value of our homes. And by the way, their kids are going to be paying more than, I don't know, by this point, $100,000 a year for college, because right now, Ivy League schools cost more than $90,000 for annual tuition. It's bananas.
Are the kids on the hook or are the parents on the hook?
Depends. I think it depends.
What kid can afford that?
So this article is actually quite, I mean, it's something that we don't know, right? Like higher education is quite expensive. It does go into sort of what schools and how much they cost. Like UPenn, I think, topped the list at over $92,000, and that includes room and board. But there are all these stipulations that if your family makes less than a certain amount of year, it's totally free. So there are things like that.
Less than $60,000, less than $75,000. It's a far cry from a lot of the people who live in those neighborhoods that we're just talking about.
Yeah, exactly. And sort of how, I mean, how do you do that? How do you do that in a rational way?
And why does it keep going up so much?
Why?
Bigger question, right?
Have you had some of the food at these schools? It's really good.
No.
Michelin-starred chefs?
Really?
Yeah.
No, I don't know where
I think I had a waffle machine.
My parents were always horrified when they came to visit me in college, and how good the food was, how nice the dorms were, how nice the lawns were. And I think it was like, you know, this is where the money's going.
Yeah, you're like, why are we paying all this for a nice treat?
Yeah, exactly.
All right, guys. All right, that's a wrap. Our cross-platform coverage on this Eclipse Monday. Radio, TV, YouTube, Bloomberg Originals, Beyond the Bell. We'll see you again, same time, same place tomorrow.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
It is Bloomberg Business Week. That's Carol Masser, and I'm Tim Stenevec, live here in the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. Well, Carol, I mentioned that the worst performer in the S&P 500 today was Paramount Global, down 7.6%. We're going to talk about that right now with Lucas Shaw, because he's got a new story out about how David Ellison, who you might know as a movie producer, a tennis fanatic, and heir to a tech fortune, is on the verge of adding another title, media mogul. That's because he's in negotiations to take charge of Paramount Global, the media giant that owns CBS, MTV, Nickelodeon. He and his backers have agreed to pay a little more than $2 billion for National Amusements. It's the family company that controls Paramount.
Yeah, exactly. Deal, though, is not yet a sure thing. Lucas Shaw is Bloomberg News entertainment reporter writing about it and reporting it out. He joins us from Los Angeles. So, all right, Lucas, lay it out for us. What's still standing in the way of David Ellison?
Well, he's got to convince Paramount's independent board of directors to go along with this deal. You know, the deal that they've negotiated seems to be pretty good for Sherry Redstone. Her family gets to sell its controlling stake. And though she may roll over some of her common shares, the deal for the board and for the company would mean merging with or really buying Skydance, giving that a pretty healthy valuation, a much higher multiple, say, than Paramount is trading at, and kind of believing and trying to convince the non-Redstone shareholders that David Ellison has a plan to grow this business, because they're not getting to cash out as part of this deal. They're having to roll over and hope that this all works.
Lucas, why does David Ellison want this company? I mean, media...
Doesn't everybody want media companies?
I don't know if people know this. It's not necessarily a great business for a lot of reasons, chief among them the disruption that we've seen from digital. But why does he want this legacy business?
Well, look, I think it starts with the studio. Paramount is one of the oldest studios in Hollywood. It's got a huge library. It's got a gorgeous lot. And those assets don't come up very often. So Sherry wants to sell. This is his best chance to buy that. I also think that this sort of puts him on a different playing field, if you will. You know, Skydance is a nice company. It's a production company. They have money to finance. They own pieces of businesses. But this would make him, you know, one of the premier media moguls around, because suddenly he'd have this big empire, and he's going to believe, as many who've come to Hollywood before, that with money and with his strategy, he can accomplish something that the current leadership is not. And so I don't think they're going in with any naivete. They see the challenges ahead for a company that makes almost all of its money from declining cable networks. But they see a chance to buy a rare asset, and then they think they can turn this thing around.
Well, right, because they get with it, right, a struggling streaming service, right? It's been losing money, or I should say, describe it that way. They've also got a bunch of cable networks. I mean, these are businesses, right, that are having difficult times. So he's got to also, that's part of the fix, right? Or he hopes to.
Yeah, well, there's a belief that they can fix the streaming service. Cable still generates plenty of cash. It just is in decline. The key would be getting streaming in a more solid place. And they, like the current management, I think, believe that the best way to do that would be to combine Paramount Plus with another streaming service, strip a bunch of cost out of it, and hopefully be able to combine the audience of those two to make it a real competitor with Netflix and Amazon and Disney.
Can you explain how this deal would work?
So David Ellison and his financial supporters, who include his father, Larry Ellison, one of the richest men in the world. It includes private equity firms Redbird and KKR. They have already agreed in principle, really, to buy National Amusements, which is the Redstone family holding company that has a majority of the controlling shares in Paramount, because Paramount has two classes of shares. There's the controlling shares, and then there's the common stock. But that deal will only happen if David Ellison can negotiate or complete a deal to merge Skydance with Paramount. He's now in an exclusive negotiating window with the independent committee of Paramount's board, which is everyone who's not Sherry Redstone and not the company management, to try to make that happen. Should that happen, you'd see this two-step deal. And then they're also discussing some ways to make those common shareholders who wouldn't get to cash out feel better. And that could be getting rid of the dual class structure. That could be paying a dividend to shareholders. That could be share buybacks, something of that nature. And then if that happens, effectively, Paramount and Skydance get merged together. I assume it continues to be called Paramount. And David takes over as CEO with Jeff Shell, who used to run NBC Universal, as his deputy.
Something really weird happened today, which is that shares of Paramount Global, ticker PARA, this is the non-voting Class B, were down 7.5%, but shares of the voting class, Lucas, were higher. It's PARAA, were higher by 2.6%. I'm not going to ask you to explain the intricacies there, but I mean, this is like you don't typically see things move in different directions like this when they're a dual class share company.
Yeah, I mean, I think the feeling is that the people who own the voting shares will get paid a premium of some kind in this deal, and that the common shareholders will not. And so that's why that's moving in that direction, or at least that's what I would assume. But you also saw, you also saw Matrix, which is a shareholder in the company, come out against the deal. And I think you're probably going to see a lot of that, because you'll see folks who are wondering if this is the best scenario. If you're going to sell, why do a deal that only makes the Redstones rich and not one that makes everyone rich?
Yeah, it's a fair question. Well, to that point, does Sherry want to do this deal? I mean, Apollo, Warner Brothers, she wants to do this deal. What about some of the other deals? I feel like we've been talking about what's going to happen with Paramount for a while here. What about some of the other options that have been out there and that we've certainly reported out, that you guys have reported out?
I mean, it's up for debate how real the other options are. So Warner Brothers Discovery has definitely met with Sherry Redstone, met with Bob Bakish, the CEO of Paramount. They have not put together an offer. I don't think they've really pursued this deal in any kind of serious way. And the market reaction when there was sort of a leak about their meetings was pretty negative. Apollo is a little more complicated. They have been around the asset for a while. They were not pursuing it as seriously as David Ellison has been. That changed a couple of weeks ago when they submit an offer to buy Paramount, but just the studio, Paramount Pictures, not the company, Paramount Global. Sherry's not interested in selling just the studio. I don't think the company's interested in selling just the studio, because then you're left with a bunch of assets nobody wants, and that's not fun for anyone. Apollo, then there was the debt for Paramount got downgraded by one of the major ratings agencies, and there is sort of a change of control provision in the debt that we don't need to get into, but it meant that Apollo now thought that they could effectively roll over the debt. They would only need to buy out the equity, and that made it an easier deal for them to swallow. And so they came back with an offer for the whole thing. Now, there's a lot of debate as to how real that offer was. There are people close to Sherry who say that they don't believe that Apollo has the financing, that they sent a letter saying, yeah, we're interested, but we're not using our fund. We'd need to go out and raise some money. There are folks on the Apollo side who say it is a real offer. My guess is it's somewhere in between. I think there's also some reservation about selling this company to a private equity firm. Sherry would like it to sell it to someone who wants to invest in it, and that's something that David Ellison and his camp have to offer.
Well, it's interesting. You just got about 20 seconds left. I mean, it sounds like Sherry, she might want to even have a little bit of a stake still in it, right, when all is said and done, and not completely walk away.
She's thinking about rolling some over, both to participate in the upside and as sort of a vote of confidence in this deal.
All right, really cool. Do you have any idea, like date-wise, time-wise, like clock ticking? Like we've been talking about it forever, Lucas?
They hope to get a deal done in the next month, right? But I'm sure this is going to be something we'll talk about for the rest of the year, even if it gets done.
All right, good stuff. As long as you're around, we'll do that. Lucas Shaw, Bloomberg News entertainment reporter, joining us from Los Angeles. Check out Lucas and the team's reporting. Just head to Bloomberg.com and also on the Bloomberg terminal. This is Bloomberg Radio.
4:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long at Bloomberg. Turned out to be a mixed Monday, an eclipse Monday, with the Dow, the S&P both lower, little changed, and NASDAQ higher, also little changed. S&P was down 2 points today, down less than 0.1%. Dow Industrials down 11, a drop there also of less than 0.1%. NASDAQ higher by 5, little changed, up less than 0.1%. 10-year yield 4.41% with a 2-year at 4.79%. Bond yields hitting 2024 highs. Spot gold today up $8.50 the ounce, up 0.4%. 23.38 the ounce on gold. A retreat for West Texas Intermediate crude, pulling back from a 5-month high after Israel said it would remove some troops from Gaza. Crude has rallied recently on escalating geopolitical tensions and supply shocks, raising the prospect of prices for global benchmark. Today we had shares of ExxonMobil lower, down today by 0.7%. ADRs of BP little changed, up by about 0.7%. Chevron shares fell by 0.2%. Again, recapping, stocks lower and little changed, with the S&P down 2 points, down less than 0.1%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Carol Massar along with Tim Stenovic live here on Bloomberg Business Week. Getting ready for what's going to be an interesting week, I think, in terms of whether or not we get another reset in terms of Fed expectations, rate cuts, how many, maybe not many, maybe not one, I don't know. But the CPI report comes on Wednesday, and then we also get the FOMC minutes as well. So we'll get maybe some, potentially, maybe a little bit more in terms of what was going on at that Fed meeting and the decision.
I did find it interesting, the bond yield side of this.
Today?
Yeah. Treasury 10-year yields, 10-year yields rising to the highest since November.
Yeah.
Striking distance of 4.5%.
Yeah, that's what we're focusing on, right? Yeah. We'll see whether or not we get there. Hey, another story, though, that caught our attention over the weekend. It was in the New York Times. It was asking if corporate America is in denial about Donald Trump. The prospect of a second Trump White House is something we talk a lot about on air with leaders running publicly held and private companies, nonprofits, really all kinds of organizations, Tim. The bottom line is whether they are prepared for what could be a tumultuous 4 years, as we kind of talked about with, I think, Carl Schleif earlier, about what's coming, or maybe it was one of our other guests, in terms of what will the election outcome, what will it mean in terms of regulatory policy, what it means for the financial sector. There's a lot of questions.
Yeah, for one view on this, we welcome back Mark Penn. He's chairman and CEO of the marketing company Stagwell. He's also chairman of the Harris Poll, which is owned by Stagwell. Mark joining us from Miami this afternoon. Mark, good to have you back with us. What are the executives that you talk to? What are they saying to you about the prospect of who wins in November?
I think executives mostly are just trying to get through the election season. They don't want any interruption of business. They don't want to get pulled into politics now that politics is going to be in its kind of most frenetic, best or worst, depending upon your perspective. And so I think executives are looking to get through the season, let the country decide, and then move forward from there.
The one thing I want to ask you about, and this is the New York Times piece over the weekend, and what they posed in kind of getting ready for what the next 4 years is, that a second Trump administration would be very different, with promises of, and this is from the Times, a more populist economic agenda and a more populist governing style to match. I think there are a lot of business leaders, some would argue out there, Mark, that think it's just going to be maybe a repeat of the 4 years. So maybe, mixed messaging, but that in the end, maybe there will be some policies that come out that are actually good. Maybe whether it's the pushback on China, whether it's on some different things, if you will. If it becomes a more populist government and that there's more control over the federal government, would that be unnerving to a lot of to the folks that you talk to in the corporate community and that you work with?
Look, I think you have to look at really where the policy differences are likely to lie, and you have to sort of get out of the New York Times analysis of what appears on X. I think that in reality, what's going to happen to trade? This is more of an America First policy, and so that means he's going to put more barriers to trade, particularly with China. I think that's clear. Taxes, probably going to keep kind of look to reenact the tax cuts and keep the corporate tax down, which is good for corporate investment. Climate change, probably going to emphasize, traditional energy sources and undo some of the climate change. So depending upon which side of that you're on, it's probably going to go, in that direction. And so I think when you've got and if you look at immigration, again, depending upon whether or not you're looking for lower labor costs or more restricted immigration, whichever you think which might give you lower growth and higher labor costs. I mean, I think you have to really look at the policy differences that are likely to be implemented. Right. Forget all the fluff, forget the X, forget the speeches, and that's really what is going to affect business and the market one way or the other.
What about a Biden administration? What's the thinking about what a second Biden White House would be, a second term of a Biden White House?
Well, I think Biden said he's going to do more climate change. He's going to move EVs up and EV infrastructure up. He wants to raise taxes, on companies and higher making individuals. I think you see he wants to increase government spending. And again, if you're on the side of, if you're a government contractor, good news. If you're concerned about deficits, maybe not as good news given the size of the budget that they delivered. So again, those are kind of the issues. And of course, how the makeup of Congress will also temper, both, regardless of who wins, because we do have checks and balances. The makeup of Congress, in which people think that the Republicans are likely to take the Senate, the Democrats likely to take the House, will have a big impact too.
Hey, Mark, you, of course, people know you for the work that you've done over your career, but including being White House pollster to former President Clinton. And I'm just wondering, from your perspective, what the polling is telling you. Like, if you're analyzing these polls right now, the current president has made up some ground in key swing states, including Arizona, Michigan, North Carolina, Georgia, Wisconsin, and Nevada. But he still trails the former president. What's your analysis of the situation if you had to make a guess as who's going to win in November?
Oh, look, it's a long way to November, and I kind of tell people there are so many events that are still out. You look at the polls today, and Trump has a lead. What is that lead based on? We're replaying the same election that occurred before. Voters have a tendency to make the same choices over and over again, and so you've got to say, what's different? What's different is people's assessment of Biden after 3.5 years versus when Biden was a promising candidate. And you'd say right now in the, my poll, he's up to 45%, and some other polls 43%. I think if he gets an improving economy, he's got to get his job rating to kind of change the current situation up 3 or 4 points. He's got to pitch more to swing voters rather than worry about the base. And having been there, he's got to focus on improving his job ratings, not by saying the economy's better, but again, by making people comfortable that he's addressing immigration and inflation, which are the major two issues that were not in existence in the previous election. You've got to say to yourself, what's the same and what's different?
Right. So which one would you say?
What's the same? Well, the candidates are the same. Okay. The issues, immigration and inflation, are different, particularly inflation. Abortion is also there is an issue that wasn't there. Climate change really hasn't changed, as an issue. It was there last time. It's there this time. And I think those are the trade-offs. And I always think it's going to come down to suburban women at the end of the day.
Interesting. Okay, so just like in 1996, I do wonder what you would advise the current president. What would you advise his team to do from a messaging perspective right now?
Messaging perspective, I've been clear. Do something about the border. The border is a very difficult issue the way that it stands. It's an issue that used to be kind of 20th on the list, and then moved up to 10th, and then moved up to fourth or fifth, and now is one or two, depending upon what technique you use to poll it. And you just can't let that issue sit there. Again, you're trying to neutralize your weaknesses and play to your strengths, and you want to maximize the weaknesses of your opponent. So my sense is he's got to do somewhat more movement on the immigration issue. I don't think what he's doing in terms of moving away from Israel is helping him. I think it's hurting him.
Yeah.
I think the weaker he seems against terrorists, the more his ratings go down on that. And I would not have proposed as big a budget as he did. I think he's doing. Obviously, he's working to regain some youth votes by going after more student loan deductions. Those are great. I mean, that's a kind of a smart political move. I think a lot of that is right. And mostly, if the economy continues to do better for the next 3 or 4 months, that probably will help the president more than anything else.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, there's a couple of issues. Immigration and economy certainly have been certainly key when it comes to polling and what really matters to most Americans. Hey, Mark, good to get some time with you. Mark Penn is Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of the marketing company Stagwell, also Chairman of the Harris Poll, which is owned by Stagwell. And Mark, they're joining us in Miami.
I mean, the polls have changed according to our recent Morning Consult Bloomberg poll.
Yeah, we have seen. Coming off a State of the Union, right?
Yeah, coming off the State of the Union. But Mark's right. There's a long way to go. Like it or not.
It's early in the game, kids. All right, let's get a check on world and national news. Back to D.C. we go, and Amy Morris. Hey, Amy.
Hey, Carol. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vowing to carry out that invasion of Rafah, declaring, quote, there is a date. The Biden administration says it will monitor new efforts by Israel to make it easier for humanitarian aid to get into Gaza. State Department spokesman Matt Miller.
We have seen the initial implementation of a streamlined process for regular truck convoys moving from Jordan through Israel and into Gaza, carrying essential supplies to those in dire need.
State Department spokesman Matt Miller. President Biden has released details of a new plan to ease student loan debt for more than 30 million borrowers after the Supreme Court struck down his first plan last year.
Our administration will propose a new rule to cancel up to $20,000 in runaway interest for any borrower that owes more now than when they started paying the loan.
The measures would apply to borrowers who meet certain criteria, including those who qualify for federal programs but have not yet been enrolled. Former President Trump putting out his position on abortion in a video posted on his Truth Social account. He says it's up to the states.
My view is now that we have abortion where everybody wanted it from a legal standpoint, the states will determine by vote or legislation or perhaps both, and whatever they decide must be the law of the land. In this case, the law of the state.
Former President Trump did not say how many weeks in a pregnancy he thinks abortion should not be allowed, but he did say he supports exceptions for rape, incest, and the life of the mother. And the eclipse has left the country. The eclipse's path of totality stretched from Mazatlan, Mexico to Newfoundland, crossing 15 states and 44 million people. As for the rest of us who were not in the direct path, we still got quite a show, a partial eclipse turning the sun into a fiery crescent. It was so cool. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg.
It's 4:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Turned out to be a mixed day on Wall Street. Both the Dow, the S&P, they declined today. Little change. That perhaps is the key takeaway in today's trading. 2-point drop on the S&P now at 5202. A drop today of less than 0.1%. Dow Industrials lower by 11, also down less than 0.1%. Nasdaq though had an up day, holding on to a 5-point gain, up less than 0.1%. 10-year 4.41% with a 2-year 4.79% on the 2-year. Spot gold today up $8.50 the ounce, up 0.4%, 23.38 for gold. West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.5%, 86.47 for a barrel of WTI. As for the interest rate backdrop and the outlook for rate cuts, Carol Schleif is Chief Investment Officer at BMO Family Office, and she was a guest right here on Bloomberg Business Week.
It really doesn't matter realistically for the intermediate and longer term how many cuts we get this year. It's directionally where we're going. And the important thing is the reason we don't see the Fed anxious to start cutting is because the economy is in great shape.
Carol Schleif of BMO Family Office. We had Amazon trading at a record today during the session. 185 right now, 185.19 is where Amazon did close today, up less than 0.1%, while fellow mega cap tech giants, including Meta, Microsoft and NVIDIA have breached record highs in recent months. Amazon has been lagging the pack. Again, though, Amazon did advance today, up by less than 0.1%. Recapping, turned out to be a mixed Monday. The Eclipse Monday today with the S&P 500 index lower by 2 points, down by about 0.1%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. All right, everybody, as you know, earnings season getting underway on this Friday. Later this week, actually, we should say. We've got JP Morgan, Citi, Wells Fargo. They all report their results.
They're reporting on Friday. Before that, you've got a couple other companies that can give us an eye into the consumer, like the travel, airlines.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fortunately, we got Red Brown with us because he's Bloomberg News earnings reporter, and he's here in the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. Red, the Friday's certainly the star of the show, but I don't want to get to that yet.
Okay.
I don't.
Go where you want. Go.
What happens before Friday?
It's your show.
We can go chronological order. I like that.
Okay, chronological.
And if we can delay talking about the banks for as long as possible, that works.
Done.
Yeah.
Okay.
What about Delta? How about some airlines?
That's the one I'm waiting for.
Well, look, I think analysts are largely positive, I think, for Delta. They expect their earnings to fall on the upper end of the guidance range. And that's kind of despite a little bit of the pullback that we're seeing in demand domestically. So a little bit of positivity, I think, there. Just to put things in perspective.
They're more of a domestic than international?
I think they do have a little bit of both.
They have a little bit of both?
Huge,
I don't know what the breakdown is, yeah.
I think it's, Southwest is almost all domestic, and then JetBlue does a little bit of international, but I think Delta is still the biggest airline, and it's largely due to their domestic business. So,
okay, cool. They're doing pretty well this year. I was just looking at the share price, but I think a fair amount of airlines, they're up about 17% so far this year.
Yeah, I think they are still doing well. It's like one of these things where maybe a little bit of surprise for people because the demand for travel is starting to wane, I think, a little bit.
Really?
Yeah, I think so. It's just like, people are, of course, they still have that pent-up demand that we've been talking about for a year now. But I think we've also been talking about a recession for a year now, too. So those things do start to weigh on people.
Yeah.
Well, I'm looking at just news you can get on the Bloomberg terminal about specific companies. And Bloomberg has Bloomberg Second Measure, which is this alternative data platform. It's really interesting. It says that sales observed at Delta Airlines by Bloomberg Second Measure fell 4.2% year on year in the fiscal quarter that ended March 31st. The data draws from a sample of credit and debit card purchases made by U.S. consumers. So again, alternative data making it available to our investor audience ahead of earnings come Wednesday.
And I think a lot of that decline that you're pointing to there is due to the pullback of fares. People aren't traveling as much, and that's when, the demand and the fares are also starting to come down as a result of that.
I'm interested to hear, considering United has had so many problems with Boeing, Delta has a mixed fleet, and they have ordered some versions of the 737 MAX that they're waiting on. So just interested to hear if we, from the company,
Commentary around that, right?
anything around
Yeah.
what they're thinking with Boeing, if they're going to change the mix, lean more toward Airbus.
Yeah.
No, I think definitely we should keep an eye out for some commentary. I mean, it is so muddled right now. It's hard to tell on at least like the earnings, the estimates data about like what analysts are thinking the actual effect will be on the business for Delta. But because I think the main thing that they are focusing on is a little bit of the fares coming down, the demand coming down, things like that. So
All right, where do you want to go?
we could do beer, or we could go to the banks.
Let's do beer.
Yes, good choice.
Okay, the sun is out, so fair enough.
So Constellation?
Constellation Brands, they are doing really well. They're one of the few kind of alcohol brands that are consistently posting strong results, and that's largely coming from two brands, which feels like you see everywhere now, which is Modelo and Corona. They are kind of the primary beneficiaries of Bud Light's kind of fall from grace in the last year.
Isn't that amazing?
Still,
Yep.
right? That's
remarkable.
shocking.
Yeah. Just to put a number on it, sorry.
No, I was going to say that it's lasted, but go ahead.
Yeah,
please.
they are expected to contribute 6 to 7%. Just Modelo alone is supposed to contribute 6 to 7% jump in earnings per share for the company. So just one beer brand in their whole suite of products. It's the number one beer now, and it's interesting too because if we look at the category of alcohol overall, it's continuing to come down every single quarter, but these two seem to be going the opposite direction.
Okay, I don't know the answer to this question, and I don't know if you guys know it, but it's like, are people choosing Modelo instead of Bud Light, or are they just like, okay, we're not drinking Bud Light anymore, we're drinking other beers, and because of that, Modelo has shot up?
I don't know the answer either, unfortunately.
I wonder what that is.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Question. Hey, just call
Audience,
us.
get in touch with us. Tell me.
Email us. Go on X. But what's interesting is, right, they're also in wine, Constellation Brands. And this is, right, I think about all the wine guests we have and just talk about a younger generation who aren't that interested in wine. And so wine has been under some pressure.
Right. And wine and spirits especially are the categories that feel that more so.
All right, let's talk about the big banks. So it's interesting. On a day today where among our most read story is the letter that JP Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon does every year to shareholders. And a lot of it was about artificial intelligence, but he also talked geopolitics, he talked regulatory, some different things. But we'll get more on that earnings call.
We will get more. We will get more.
How well they did really well last year. How are they going to do?
I think with JP Morgan, it's going to be a situation of them continuing to kind of extend that lead out in the front. The headline that we expect to or the measure that we expect to grab a lot of the headlines will be net interest income again. They're expected to jump 12% after growing at 49% last year. So just continuing to really put or really benefit from those additional assets that they picked up during the regional banking crisis. It doesn't seem like that's slowing down at all for them.
You know what I did notice? The First Republic banks that are still are branded First Republic, and now if you walk by them, it says, a JP Morgan.
It does say that.
Yeah, it says, because they still have prominent advertising throughout New York City.
Yeah.
It's still, the brand still exists, which is really interesting to me.
Well, you think about it in times of crisis, right? Whether it was the great financial crisis or whether it was this, over a year or about a year ago.
Yeah, over a year, March last year.
That when some banks run into trouble, you often see JP Morgan jump in and pick up some assets.
Right.
To be fair, not only about JP Morgan, Citi, Wells Fargo, State Street, and BlackRock all reporting on Friday.
Yeah. If we can just jump to the first name you said there, Citigroup.
Yeah.
With Citigroup, it's big news. The strategic overhaul is complete. We've been talking about it for a while now. They came out a couple of weeks ago and said they expected to finish up in March, and seems like they have hit that deadline. So we will get kind of the first view at the new and improved Citigroup this quarter.
They're doing better than JP Morgan this year. I was surprised. Citi's up about 20%. JP Morgan's up just shy of 17%.
I think people are really positive about this overall, and it seems like this will kind of be the last quarter of real pain. Earnings per share are still expected to fall by another 33%. I don't want to get too ahead of ourselves, but next quarter they're expected to jump by 9%, and that'll be the biggest since 2020, or I think in the last 2 years, if my memory serves. So yeah, quite significant turnaround there. Finally,
I've said half hour. 30 seconds on Wells.
This similar story could be kind of the quarter that they use to turn around their business. Fees are expected to come up. They're expected to get better fixed asset pricing as well, and that could be the foundation they use for the next couple quarters.
Are you ready, Red, for earnings season? Like, are you ready for this?
Always ready.
This is like every Friday you're going to be with us again.
I'm excited. Yeah, this is my favorite part of the week.
Hey, Wells Fargo, I'm going to say what's interesting is, right, we get a good read on consumers. I mean,
Yeah.
they all have credit cards, but
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and I think that's one of the things that people are expecting the fees as well, the credit card fees to improve. So, yeah, maybe a good read into how the consumer's shaping up.
didn't mean to go serious on it.
That's fine.
We're excited to have you back.
Next week, too, and Friday as well.
All right, looking forward to it, of course, talking with our own Red Brown, Bloomberg News.
Okay, today I'm going to talk about how to succeed with a startup. Obviously, more than can be said here in 20 minutes, but I will do the best I can. The most important thing, the number one lesson we try to teach startups is that the degree to which you're successful approximates the degree to which you build a product that is so good, people spontaneously tell their friends about it. Startups always ask us for the secret to success. They always want to believe it's something other than this, because this is really hard to do. But this is it. If you can build a product that is so good, people spontaneously tell their friends about it, you have done 80% of the work that you need to be a really successful startup. If you think about the most successful companies you know, Google, Facebook, whatever, you probably found out about them because a friend of yours said, you got to try this, it's great. So this is the bar. Something that people love so much they tell their friends about it. One important indicator for a product like that is a product that's simple to explain and easy to understand. If you can't explain in a few words what you do, and if at least some people don't say, oh, that's pretty interesting, that's usually a mistake. It's usually a sign of unclear thinking or a need that is not big enough.
I want a bank that shows me what I spend instantly.
We're Monzo. Give us a go. See?
I want a bank that can help me budget for the things I need, like a new leather jacket for Bingo.
We can do that.
Bingo's my cockapoo.
Hi, Bingo.
It's a real faff to sign up.
It takes less than 10 minutes.
Race you.
You're on. Time's up. How'd you get on?
It's a draw.
Is it? We hear you, Bingo. You make Monzo Monzo.
All right, everybody. That's going to do it almost for Tim and me.
How do you feel about that?
Not yet.
The Eclipse version of
who was
Bloomberg
that?
Business Week. Deb Christner's back. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well.
Yeah,
it's been crazy. We've been very busy.
Yeah.
So talking about a lot tonight. Janet Yellen coming back from China, dealing with the issue of overcapacity. The Japanese Prime Minister.
What was the goal of her visit? I thought it was interesting.
Just to talk about the risk that China puts the rest of the world at if you continue to export a lot of this stuff that is being very inexpensively made. I mean, they're going to flood the market. Europe, as we've talked about this, concerned about the EV, the dump of inexpensive electric vehicles. That's one concern.
But also threatening sanctions for some of Chinese banks that maybe aid Russia's
There's
war,
that too. Ed's going to talk about that. Yeah. So there's the geopolitical stuff. There's the fentanyl stuff. Just overall financial instability. One of the things that I think she expressed concern about is the unwind of the property bubble in China. So there are a lot of different threads.
We talked about that in the 10 companies to watch. One company in particular, right? Because of because of the real estate concerns, financial exposure.
So what else were you guys talking about today? The Jamie Dimon
Little
newsletter.
thing in the air, you know?
Right. The shareholder newsletter.
Yeah, we talked about the shareholder newsletter, the AI of
You're not
course, being a
biting.
part of that.
About what?
Sun, moon,
No,
eclipse.
no.
No. All
Do you
right.
remember in the 1990s there was a guy that got into technical analysis of markets looking at astrology?
Oh, wow.
Arch
A little
Crawford?
bit, yes,
Yeah, he was a big name in this
yes.
field, and I say that
How did
because
he do?
Kepler, Johannes Kepler, who was the guy that kind of mapped out the path of planetary motion not being spherical but elliptical.
Yeah.
But he conflated a lot of astronomy with astrology, and I was just thinking about that today and remembering Arch Crawford in the 90s talking about trying to determine where the market is going. There was a fascinating story in New Yorker, if you can Google it, from about 2009. Can't remember the guy who thought about this, but he was looking at these cycles in market, these major events that would happen every 8.5 years.
Okay.
And one of the things that he discovered was that it was like 3,141 days, something like that. So it's pi times 1,000. And that becomes the period of time, the interregnum.
The kitchen, 3 to 5
between,
years. The Kuznets, 15 to 25 years.
I don't know. I'll have to
The
check
secret
on it.
cycle. October
It's a secret cycle.
2009.
2009. Okay, I didn't know what the subtitle was.
Yeah.
But you get into, so much of technical analysis is looking at these super cycles based on where we've been, right? So I was just thinking about that because it's pattern recognition, which is another thing that artificial intelligence is really all about, right?
Right.
Looking at data that we have on what has happened in the past, the patterns that have emerged, and making those connections. I thought it was
Martin
interesting.
Armstrong.
That was the eclipse hitting my mic, by the way.
Yeah.
Wasn't me.
So
but it's
that's
really
what I was
cool,
thinking.
Very
right?
cool.
Yeah.
What
But
were you
do
saying?
also- but you
Sorry.
do, well,
Okay, go ahead.
but you do also wonder, like, is this cycle akin to others? Like,
I have no idea.
I mean, how many times do we come out of a global pandemic where the economy shuts down and then it comes back roaring? Like, I don't know.
Ubiquity, the Buchanan book, I would recommend that. But I was just talking to one of the programmers upstairs on the 6th floor.
Yeah.
And she said to me, she's amazed that the equity market is holding up as well as it is right now. She's
Why?
Just that, it's just that there's so many reasons for instability, right? And yet we're talking about the
Carol
stocks
Schleif, what did Carol Schleif say?
near all-time highs.
Growth.
Yeah.